First time doing that.
I know, it's kind of fun. Good evening, everyone. Glad you're here. I think Julie is on her way. She is our chair, but as vice chair, I'm going to call the meeting to order so that we can get started. We will have, actually, I think Julie's leaving for a little bit, and Ms. Monopoly, Dr. Abramowitz, they all have children in concerts performing tonight. So they're here now. They'll leave. They'll come back. It's nothing personal. It's just they want to see their children perform, and I don't blame them. So thank you for that. Okay, let's get started. Today's January 30th, and this is our school committee meeting. Welcome, David. Administrative business. We start with the calendar. Oh, here it is. Lots of meetings, lots of school committee meetings in February, so take a look at that. Superintendent search meetings, February 4th. BHS Building Advisory Committee meeting, the 16th. A Driscoll Building Advisory Committee, the 13th of February, March 19th. And then there are other meetings. You might want to note the Pan Asian Lunar New Year Festival at the high school on February 8th at 3 o'clock. The election is our primary election, correct? Is that primary election is on March 3rd. We hope everybody's a registered voter and will vote. And a few other celebrations coming up. Helen.
So can I add one, please? Sure. The Teen Center Gala is on March 7th at the Teen Center, just to let everybody know. Maybe we could put that on our calendar.
Yeah, that's not on here.
Yeah. And actually, the Brookline Steps of Success is on there, but the Brookline Mental Health Center Gala is, I'll get the date to you. It's in May, but.
Anything else? Anyone else want to add to the calendar?
We just start.
Okay. Julie, you want to take over?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so we have the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions about the 2 high school trips? All right, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second? Second, thank you. Right, any further discussion? Yes?
One question, because I was reading about our hockey team, and I'm not sure who might know the answer, that they're doing very well and might go to the finals this year. Does anybody know? Because I see they're going to Hartford, and I don't know if...
Well, I think you might be jumping the gun just a little, but hopefully that...
Well, I was wondering what the Hartford trip was. It's not...
Yeah, I don't know what that trip is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Never mind.
But they are doing better than usual, and we're excited about that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. And we have our 2019 recipients of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents Certificates of Academic Excellence. Mr. Lemus.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham. So each year, we have the pleasure of honoring 2 Brookline High School seniors with the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents Award for Academic Excellence. Year after year, we sit in amazement as high school educators share inspiring stories of hard work, perseverance, academic achievement, and unlimited potential. And this year is no different. It's my pleasure to welcome Brookline High School students Gideon Lieberman and Jenilyn Rodriguez-Ortiz and their families to our meeting this evening to receive this award. First, we'll have Associate Dean of Students Melanie Alexander presenting to Gideon, followed by Paul Epstein and Amy Beyer presenting to Jenilyn. So, Melanie.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Congratulations to both recipients. I'd like to talk about Gideon. He is a force of nature. Literally, nothing can stop this young man. First of all, Gideon's academic achievements are impressive because he consistently devotes himself to his studies. When he is interested in something, he throws his complete self into it. For example, Gideon has long had a passion for all things Greek, Roman, and mythical, and is particularly fond of Latin. In recent years, He has developed that passion into a serious set of intellectual interests, thinking critically about how the texts and characters he studies in school give insight into modern problems. Teachers and students alike say that Gideon is a hardworking, intellectually curious, and positive presence in the classroom. One of his classmates, with whom I was speaking just a few weeks ago about something random and your name came up, recounted an experience with Gideon last year. She said that Gideon was the most giving, kind, and smart people in that class, and that she always wanted to work with you, Gideon, in groups because you were passionate and helpful. Gideon also has an incredible dedication to theater, and growing up has always wanted to pursue a life filled with creative writing, music, and drama. What a combination. We are so proud that Gideon found his voice in high school and plans to use it to help those who are marginalized and discriminated against. That growing sense of advocacy translated to his studies as well, for when he has been faced with difficult material or troubling situation, he has developed many skills to advocate for himself to make sure he gets what he needs. Gideon is comfortable with who he is and gladly pursues activities and interests that are out of the mainstream. My reference to Gideon as a force of nature is metaphorical as well as literal. Gideon was born with congenital anomalies from head to toe. He had a major surgery on the first day of his life to connect his esophagus to his stomach. He would face 9 additional significant surgeries, the last at age 11, when 2 cobalt rods were fused into his spine to address early onset kyphosis, a curvature of the spine. He was also diagnosed with microcephaly at birth. I have been truly astounded, however, by his growth and development, his hard work, and his modesty about the difficult obstacles which he has overcome. Given the health challenges and related adversity that Gideon faced throughout his childhood and teenage years, we continue to be impressed by his academic record, personal accomplishments achieved in the context of these challenges. So congratulations. Brookline High School is proud to honor you as a 2019 Superintendent's Award recipient.
Paul, if you could come speak about Jenilyn, please. Sorry, and Amy. Yeah, Amy's going to go. Great.
So I have the honor tonight of honoring Janelyn Rodriguez Ortiz, and I'm excited to share these words with you. When one meets Janelyn, it's hard not to be immediately won over by her warm smile and calm maturity. She is rarely alone at BHS, as her peers adore her. And who wouldn't when she generously doles out hugs and supportive words to her friends on a regular basis? In this way, she is a mama to so many at BHS because she exudes love and kindness. What is remarkable about Janelyn is that there is no hint of anger or bitterness that would have been so easy for her to carry, given the obstacles she has had to overcome. During her first 2 years at BHS, Janelyn had to contend with trauma and sadness that most people never experience in their life. In 2017, Janelyn's mom was diagnosed with a challenging health condition, and in the same year, her older sister was murdered. It's impossible to fully understand the impact of these 2 events, but what is clear is that Whereas experiences like these would break many other people's spirit, Janelyn has more than persevered and let her beautiful light shine. Janelyn is by nature a very curious, intelligent young woman. If you look at her transcript, the traumatic events that occurred during her freshman and sophomore years definitely impacted her academic performance. But what you can also see from her transcript is that between her sophomore and senior year, Janelyn has worked hard and successfully gained the tools and the skills to overcome the challenges that existed in her life. And it's important to acknowledge tonight all the help and support that Janelyn received, both from BHS staff and students, many of whom are here tonight. At the end of her junior year, though she had made incredible academic progress, Janelyn was able to recognize what worked best for her. Positive, close relationships with her classmates and teachers was top of the list. Her self-awareness led Janelyn to explore the ACE program, which she joined this past September. In ACE, Janelyn has been able to build upon all of the emotional and academic progress she made in the year prior. She received A's in her first cycle of courses and continues to do extremely well. Janelyn has truly blossomed, not just as an intellectual, but as a social activist, and has been a wonderful addition to the ACE community. In ACE, all seniors must do a legacy project in which they must choose an issue that they care about and then take action on. Janelyn has chosen to do volunteer and activism work on the coral reef. At a recent exhibition, she talked at length about the importance of the ocean in her life. In addition to being an avid, self-taught student of marine biology, Janelyn also spoke about how healing it is for her when she spends time by the ocean. She shared a beautiful poem about how the ocean calms and soothes her soul. Janelyn's strength and resiliency is unbelievably powerful and enduring, like the ocean in this time of global warming. It makes sense that Janelyn is drawn to protecting coral, the beautiful, fragile, but essential living organism that keeps the ocean ecosystem balanced. Janelyn hopes to pursue marine biology at UMass Boston next year, and they would be wise to accept this remarkable young woman who I feel very lucky to know.
Hi, I'm Paul Epstein, social worker at the high school. I was going to prepare really extensive remarks tonight that would have caused Janelyn to blush and me to maybe cry, but I was warned so many times that we have limited time, so I'm going to keep it brief. I decided instead I'm just going to read from Janelyn's latest report card. Ready, Janelyn? Okay. The first class is titled, Handling What Life Throws at You with Courage and Perseverance. Janelyn's grade, A+. The second class is titled, Epitomizing Kindness, Excelling as a Daughter, Sister, and Friend. Janelyn's grade, A+. The third class is titled, The Complete Package, Loving Yourself and the World Around You. Janelyn's grade, what a surprise, A+. Janelyn, I'm so proud of you. We all are. You have your rooting section right behind you there. Congratulations to you. We can't wait to see what your post-BHS future holds.
Congratulations. We're very happy to have you here tonight. You're welcome to stay. You're also welcome to head home if you have homework or other things that you wanted to get accomplished this evening. And we're going to transition over to our public comment. All right, great. So we have our interim superintendent report.
Great. Good evening, folks. So a few things to update you on. First of all, the coronavirus. Excellent. And China exchange travel, just to update the committee and the community. On Tuesday, January 28th, I shared the attached correspondence with all of our families and staff outlining some of the steps we are taking to respond to the coronavirus. My letter included the town's health advisory. The immediate public health risk from the coronavirus in the United States remains low. Our school nurses continue to carefully monitor student symptoms, and we stand ready to make adjustments to any of our practices if advised to do so by the Centers for Disease Control or Brookline Health Department. As you all may know, there are currently no existing cases in Brookline or, I believe, still Massachusetts, which is good news. The coronavirus outbreak has had a direct effect on the 8 Brookline High School students who were scheduled to depart to Xi'an on February 6th as part of our China exchange program. In light of the recommendation from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, they issued a level 3 travel health notice to avoid all non-essential travel to China. We made a decision yesterday to indefinitely postpone the departure of our students. For the students and their families, this is very disappointing, though not unexpected news. The health and safety of our students and the chaperone, Ms. Christine Shen, was foremost in our minds as we made this decision. Next steps include a meeting with the students this week and a meeting with students and their families early next week to discuss contingency plans. This is a rapidly evolving situation with new information available every day, so our next steps will require careful consideration. I'd like to thank Anthony Meyer and Steve Lantos at the high school for all their work keeping Czech students and families informed, and as well as keeping in regular contact with our partners in Xi'an. I also want to acknowledge the incredible work being done by our entire school nursing staff under the leadership of Tricia Laham, our coordinator of school health services. We are grateful every day for the work of our school nurses, and it's times like these in particular when we become aware of their day in and day out contributions to the health and safety of all of our students. Moving on, just yesterday, in fact all yesterday into the evening, this room became a filming studio for our work to help the Department of Education film a production to feature Brookline's LPAC, or English Learners Parent Advisory Committee. Brookline was one of 3 districts selected in the Commonwealth to be featured in a training video being produced by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Center for Applied Linguistics in Washington, D.C. The production was organized by Brookline's Office of English Language Education and featured parents, staff, and school committee member Helen Charlowski, who's our LPAC liaison. The videos will be used to support districts and families across the state with the establishment of their English Learner Parent Advisory Councils. So last year, the state, as part of the Look Act, requires district to have English Learner Parent Advisory Councils. Ours has been up and running since last year. Yesterday, members of Brookline's LPAC, staff from the Office of English Language Education, and the LPAC School Committee Liaison, Mr. Charlowski, participated in private interviews to share their experiences working with our LPAC. Later in the evening, the production crew taped a full room of parents attending an actual LPAC meeting where they were learning about our math curriculum. The final training videos will be available this spring. Oops. It should come as no surprise to you that Brookline was chosen to be part of this production. Our ELE staff, including Mindy Paolo, Caitlin O'Neill, and Vicki Ching, and all of our ELE educators work tirelessly to serve Brookline English Learner student population. Their dedication reflects the district's commitment to our EL families. Our EL staff always remains acutely aware of the special challenges that our EL families face, and they work every day to ensure that our EL students are properly supported so they can thrive in our schools. Just one quick aside. Last night I was here as they were wrapping up and had a chance to check in with Kathleen Hubbard, our math coordinator, and also Mindy Paolo, who organized the full day. And Mindy and I and Kathleen just discussed, once again, sort of, and I was reminded of, the bravery and the courage and the tremendous just wherewithal it takes for a family to move from a country from many, many miles away, or across the continent or across the world, and come here and be in a brand new community, a brand new world, struggling in the language very often, but just what examples they are of courage and perseverance and resilience for all of us. And it's just, I know my family never did it. I don't think I could do it, but we have thousands of families in our district who do it and are successful with it every single day. So, did you want to add something?
Yeah. I think it was a really impressive day. The film crew was great and really tried to get at the essence of what happens here in Brookline, and I hope I did us well as a school committee liaison to this. I asked them for a copy of whatever it is they're going to be putting out so that we could see it at some point. The other thing that I did do is talk to the person from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, whose name right now escapes me, who's in charge of English learners, not the person, but sort of the person under him, and talked about the issue of unfunded mandates, that the Look Act didn't come with any money, but came with a lot of accountability, a lot of paperwork, a lot of testing, and that it's really a problem for districts, and and that we wouldn't benefit. Certainly, some districts might benefit from the new Chapter 70 funding, but that isn't going to happen here. So I don't know how much good it did, but at least I was able to vent a bit. So just to let everybody know.
It is
And Mindy did a fantastic job. I mean, she orchestrated the whole day, and that evening it was really very impressive.
It was. Just a reminder that this is the second or maybe third time this year that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has acknowledged and recognized some of our programs. Earlier, they brought a number of folks to see how our Therapeutic Learning Center works over at the Coolidge Corner School, and so it's just nice that folks are continue to recognize the great programs, services, and supports we have here in Brookline. So just to continue on, BHS transition events for 8th grade student and families. Earlier this month, the high school announced their annual series of transition events for the class of 2024, those folks who are coming in from 8th grade. These informative and helpful events are designed to get 8th grade students and their families ready for life at Brookline High School. I've attached a letter from Head of School Anthony Meyer and BHS at Old Lincoln School, Dean Janae Utaro, with the details and full schedule of events. Our unique K-8 school configuration means that our 8th graders have spent many years in one school community, so the transition to BHS represents a major milestone for students and families alike. These events serve as a bridge to help everyone through this process. We had a fantastic Medco field trip, I guess a week ago, or this past weekend, to the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Festival in D.C. On January 25th, the Medco program organized a field trip to Washington, D.C. for 20 students to attend the 18th Annual Historically Black Colleges and Universities Festival. This event is the largest HBCU recruitment event in the nation, hosting over 15,000 students and parents with representation from over 70 historically black colleges and universities. This whirlwind trip down to D.C. on a flight at the crack of dawn and back the same evening was organized as part of Medco's commitment to supporting our scholars in their college selection process. We have a new director for Brookline Adult and Community Education. I'm very pleased to announce that we've hired Michelle McGlone to be the director for Brookline Adult and Community Education. She started with us this past week and is already hard at work getting up to speed. She most recently worked with the New England Patriots, where she oversaw the popular education programs of the Patriots Hall of Fame that hosted more than 20,000 visitors annually. She received her Master's in Education in Curriculum and Instruction from North Carolina State University and Organizational Management from Endicott College. As she worked her way through the Master's program, Michelle worked with MBA students in career services for the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. She has 10 years of experience as an educator and 7 years of experience as an instructional leader. Her track record of positive and productive interactions with community leaders, educators, students, and families will put her in good stead as she begins her important work with BASE. One more update. This morning, I was able to participate, or I attended, a Steps to Success celebration to honor Judy Katz. I had the pleasure of attending the celebration as she steps down as board chair of Steps to Success after 5 years. As STS Executive Director Shoma Hawk said, Judy is one of STEP's dearest friends and fiercest advocates and has given her years of selfless dedication to this organization that's so close to the heart. Ms. Katz will continue to serve on the board. We are grateful to have a partner like Steps to Success to support some of our most vulnerable students, and we join Steps in congratulating and thanking Judy for her service. The rest of the report just contains some attachments from the different pieces I let you know about, including Brookline High School transition and updates around the coronavirus from the Health Department. But other than that, we're all set.
All right. Perhaps for the first time ever, we're 30 minutes in and we're actually on schedule in our agenda. So this is something. All right. So we're going to have... we have a presentation on the interim superintendent's recommended FY 2021 budget.
I just might mention that two of our colleagues left. I mentioned it earlier, but some people came in later. They're off to see their children perform in concerts, and so they will be back later. Are you leaving as well?
My daughter's is next week, so
Next week,
yes,
okay.
and Miss Wolfdikoff as well. So the two of us will be leaving next week. Tis the season.
Ready to go. So folks, I'm going to go through a few steps here, or the intent is to not only inform all of you who are up to speed on many things in terms of what we've been working on and how we've been working on it in the process, but also to inform the community as well. So some of this will be repeat for some of you, but for most folks it'll be new information. So I want to start with the big picture. As I'll explain later, more about the process that we've used to develop this, my budget recommendation. Had a lot of work with all sorts of folks, directors, coordinators, principals, senior staff, obviously, comment. And so some of our priorities developed through the budget process related to the budget are these right here. So first of all, Brookline our schools have tremendous things going on in them every single day. Led by our educators, our teachers, our special educators, our support staff, guidance counselors, just everyone working together here at central office and schools to support our students and families and staff. So through the budget process, we really wanted to focus on preserving our robust, well-rounded learning experience for our students pre-K through 12, including our programs, service, and supports. We really wanted to focus on how can we best preserve the integrity of the instructional environment for our teachers, educators, and schools, or our classrooms, or schools, or that sort of thing. How can we live within our means by foregoing added new positions in favor of preserving as best we can the programs, staff, services, and supports we currently have. Also looking at how we can perhaps strengthen the emotional and behavioral support we provide our students pre-K to 12, as is commonly understood these days across our country and also in Brookline. Students are really struggling with greater levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. And so that's an area we want to continue to strengthen as we go forward, both this year and in the years to come. We want to identify cost savings through targeted adjustments rather than across-the-board cuts to any programs, and then also really sort of thinking hard about how can we adjust staffing and programs and services based on the situation at each school as part of an annual assessment of what is needed in the upcoming year. I'll talk about this quite a bit tonight, but just the sense that while we've been growing, we haven't had as much need to sort of think each year sort of an annual process like I understand Brookline used to do, and most all districts really do, is how do you make adjustments on a variety of areas in each school or across the district on an annual basis. And that's something we're going to need to get back to as a regular practice, which I'll talk more about tonight. So there's a lot of good news. We'll continue the extensive and diverse programming that is Public School of Brookline's hallmark. These are just a few examples of the things we have in our schools that we are proud of, we want to preserve, and add value to children's lives and families' lives and our staff's lives. So we'll I won't read them all because it's things we're doing now, but they're really high quality work. Our K-5 World Language Program, we are preserving and protecting because it is a model for many folks. Our award-winning K-12 art and music programs, our support for our most vulnerable students by maintaining strong special education programs across the district and for students ages 3 to 22. Our highly regarded district-wide special education programs, a diverse range of English learner programs that support students who speak dozens of languages across our system. The work we're continuing to do to strengthen our K-8 math curriculum instruction, and also the fact that we have in all of our schools full guidance, psychologists, and nursing support in our K-8s, plus social workers as well at our high school. These are great things that we will continue to do despite, in some ways, a difficult budget. And it continues. We have maker spaces and mobile maker resources in all K-8 schools. We have a wide variety of personalized support for students through programs geared to their specific needs. We have collaborations with the rec department on outdoor and environmental education, substantial advanced placement offerings at BHS, and extensive high school extracurricular programs in athletics, arts, leadership, clubs, and activities. My purpose in listing all these out is just for us to take a moment to acknowledge all the great work we do that exists in our schools, has for many years, and will continue. That, of course, is just one fraction of all the great things that are happening for our students. We will also expand our specialized program for students with autism and similar profiles at Heath. So we've been talking about that, sort of expanding the RISE program at Heath in order to give some space to Runkle. And as you decided last week, we'll expand our highly regarded and deeply loved BEAP program at the Clark School, the Clark Road building. So I'll be talking a lot of time about how we're closing the projected budget gap. This is also good news. We'll be able to do it through limited and targeted adjustments rather than large-scale cutting of staff, programs, or services. We will maintain our ability to deliver high-quality instruction, a well-rounded education, and robust programs. These targeted cuts and adjustments, really, I should say, will result in limited impact to our classrooms. Any increase in class sizes will be consistent with other schools and grade levels across the district, and any staff cuts will only happen or primarily happen through attrition, retirements, and reallocation. This will be a process that will extend months long, so we can figure out how to do this well. But what you will see is we'll be doing I have put forth that we need to do a very limited amount of any of these changes, okay, which I'll spell out later, because in the bold here on the bottom, the most significant reductions we'll make are in planned growth and in continuing reductions that we made in previous years. That will take care of the vast majority of closing the budget gap, which is significant and important news. And I'll explain to you how we got there. So we're going to go over, that's just the big picture. That's sort of the headlines, the preview. I'll go through these 5 areas as we go step by step. So first, an enrollment update. Next week, the community will get a report from our consultants that the school committee hired and decided to engage last summer to update our enrollment projection methodology and our enrollment projections. So as you know, for many years, our primary challenge has been our sort of significant, ongoing, sort of unyielding growth in enrollment that has, made Brookline, 40% bigger than it was just 15 years ago. and sort of broken all of the sort of typical historical cyclical increases and decreases. Next week we should have two numbers. We had actually parallel processes on enrollment. One was Cropper McKibben, our outside consultants, expert consultants, and then also through the Pierce Project, MSBA has been working on enrollment projection. They've reached the same conclusion, although their numbers do differ slightly because their methodologies are different. And essentially the top line message that PSB's enrollment growth is leveling off. Okay, it doesn't for the foreseeable future go down from both projections, but it will level off. BHS at the K-8s, BHS will continue to grow before stabilizing in the next few years as well. But that is a significant difference from previous years, for the last 15 years really, and that affects how we allocate and choose to spend resources. And so it affects some of the decisions we're making and have made in this recommended budget. So just looking back a little bit in terms of how we got here, because this doesn't happen in just 1 year. Any budget is the sort of accumulation of prior budgets and previous planning. So just to recount quickly the 2015-2018 override objectives. So they really were in many ways making up for and accounting for the growth that had been happening for 10 years prior to the 2015 override. We wanted to maintain our small class sizes. We wanted to maintain student-staff ratios in accordance with the overall enrollment. We wanted to identify additional personnel and operating costs for capital projects. At that point, we were really zeroing in on Upper Devotion at Old Lincoln, as the Devotion project at that point was just beginning in terms of just beginning construction. In 2018, we laid out a plan that was really supporting our contractual obligations, both in collective bargaining agreements and supporting our staff and also mandated services. An ongoing commitment to staffing and to support the enrollment increases, and then also a limited number of critical new investments to support the superintendent's goal of creating equitable outcomes and opportunities at PSB. Those are the main objectives of those two overrides. They resulted in significant increases in staff and programming across our district. More teachers at K-8s, more teachers at BHS to address enrollment growth, more teachers, more classroom teachers, and also specialists and support in the areas of guidance and nursing and some English learner education. And really were designed to continue the expanded place strategy that had been approved and was supported by the school committee. As we summarized, I think it was earlier this month, or maybe I think it was earlier this month, is just the growth in both enrollment, our staff, and then the operating budget going back to 2005 when enrollment growth started. So you can see these are very significant increases, and they really speak to, sort of in just, plain, not black and white, but blue and white, I guess. The commitment the community has made to our public schools over many years. While our increase in students was going up 1,800 or 1,900 students, we increased our staff by hundreds of folks in our classrooms primarily, which we explained earlier this month, and we also increased and nearly doubled our budget, the operating budget of the school district in that same time. As we summarize in our presentation, the positions added since the two overrides, you'll see that primarily was in our teachers and educators, also paraprofessionals. The yellow are school-based staff. So you can see the vast majority of those folks are school-based professionals and educators. And then you see there as well, as we detailed and have on the website in sort of granular detail, the comings and goings of central office staff and central office leaders, and that total is 8.9 since 2015 of additional staff there. So in terms of the 2018 override, FY 2021 is the last year of the override. So I'm just going to summarize here what was planned, the planned additions for FY 2021. So we have personnel, so that's classroom staff, so 15 teachers, but that's split between high school and the K-8s. Continuing our support of nurse guidance, English learner education, and then also maintain educational leader ratio, and that was to add a 0.8 associate dean at the high school. This is what was planned in the override. services, so we recalibrated the benefits reserve. We were addressing increased transportation and mandated and contractual expenses for transportation and tuition increases for special education. And then also we're addressing supplies supplies lines that need to be adjusted as enrollment and also price increases were hitting us. So those are sort of, and this is going to come back. We'll talk about this later in the presentation, because this is an area we had to look at closely when facing the gap that we have. So I want to speak next to the budget process we had this year, which is significantly different both among staff and leaders, but also among the public as well, in terms of information we were sharing and details we were trying to help people understand. So prior budget processes were siloed, much more so than we've seen this year. Budget managers, and when I say budget manager, I'm talking about principals, curriculum coordinators, program directors, deputy superintendents, those who have budgets that they manage and control and sort of oversee. But in the past, they were primarily on their own budgets, independent from each other. They would meet with senior leaders and their department heads and the superintendent, or primarily the deputy superintendent for finance administration, and have conversations and think things through really on their own, in just very small groups. There are few, if any, small or large group meetings that included a variety of roles and budget managers from different areas of our schools. So really cross-functional and cross-department or cross-school conversations. Folks were pretty siloed, and that's not uncommon in places and organizations. It's just the way we've worked, at least for the past 5 years as I've seen it. This year's budget process was much more collaborative. Principals, coordinators, and directors were all involved much more than in the past. They worked together to plan and prepare for budget challenges, which we laid out in November. Collaborated and worked together to generate ideas and possible solutions to the budget challenges we faced. And they met, discussed, and gave feedback to help each other think about different ways to organize programs, staff, and schedules. I can't say enough about the work folks did. It's difficult work. It's challenging work to rethink how you're doing things, or come up with ideas that you may, or you're not sure they may fly, or they may, how they might be taken by folks. And there were difficult conversations, and we did difficult conversations in lots of different ways. But folks took it very seriously. I really feel, and I think we really witnessed, that folks were taking much more ownership over their budgets, their programs, their schools, and what can happen or needs to happen in them, what's possible, what's necessary, and what could be, in difficult times, could be adjusted. So we also met in a variety of different structures, large group meetings of all budget managers, meeting by departments, job-like groups, one-on-one meetings with myself and some other deputy superintendents. I formed a district budget group, which is a cross-role group of school and district leaders, about 15 people, including those folks there. They met 3 or 4 times to review all the ideas that were coming up and being documented and being considered, I should say. They discussed the viability of these ideas. They made additional suggestions. There really was a really remarkable sort of generation of possibilities that people took very, very seriously. This group also reviewed and gave input on the priorities, gave feedback on the process and messaging prior to the final decisions being made. That was done at that last meeting we had last week with them. So just to talk about the process here quickly, I mentioned some of this already, but the idea in November, December was really an idea generation phase that provided folks to come up with a large number of divergent ideas. We met with all principals to discuss their school-specific proposals and identify priorities for maintaining areas of strength. So I asked them very clearly, what are the 1 or 2 things you really, really want to keep to build at your schools? And there was remarkable similarity of responses on those. Really was enlightening, actually. Late December and January, all those ideas were considered at the department and district level. So if you think of, at the November, December was very divergent, okay? And then December and January, we started to converge on what could be done and what was necessary. We identified final proposals as budget numbers became clearer. We met with each principals again to share their final school and district recommendations and get additional input before finalizing them. And then Office of Student Services and OTL, they continue to meet with their directors and coordinators to flesh out ideas and consider the impact of any possible changes. And they'll continue planning as we go forward. And then parallel to all that, as if that wasn't enough, I feel like we did a very good job of providing the public not everything from numbers and staffing information, but also how we do things, how special education transportation is worked out, how we staff at the high school and schedule there, how the numbers of paraprofessionals and their roles in our school districts, how stipends work. 15 different public presentations which were designed to inform and educate and help the school committee, but also the community really have a better understanding of where does the money go, how do we use it and spend it, and what choices do we make. I found, just in terms of my personal opinion, that the conversations at the committee meetings here were rich. They were, folks were curious and inquisitive, as you always are, but really I felt got to a level of conversation about the budget and really programs and the work we do that I just personally hadn't seen myself. Not to say they didn't exist, but I hadn't seen them myself. These were intended to educate and not advocate, and I hope we walked that line well. I think another powerful piece of it was that curriculum coordinators and directors and others were very involved in development of those presentations, and in many cases in the delivery of those presentations, so they could be asked direct questions about the work that they and their staff do. So, just moving on in terms of the numbers and the path towards a balanced budget. So here we get into the numbers. We have the detail in the numbers, and we'll see just how things are sorting out. So first, how did we get here? As folks remember, in November, on November 14th, I think it was, I explained how it looked like we are facing significant budget challenges for a number of reasons. In some ways, and we have had a structural deficit for a number of years. In some ways, we really signaled that there would be a deficit in the third year of the override. Part of the reason for that was we knew what our expenses would be going forward, our mandated expenses, and the override that was approved by the voters was less than that. So in that sense, we it was signaled that we would be facing some more difficult budget challenges in the final year. Another thing that was concerning to us at that point was just the fact that most of the revenues for the third year for FY21 from the override were in a sort of less secure or less predictable source of revenue. So instead of the tax levy override, it was more on non-property tax revenue, tax receipts. We'll talk about later how those have panned out quite well, and because of that, we're in better shape than we were concerned about at this time. And at that point, again, this is going back, I guess 2.5 months now. This is what we were concerned about, and so I was sharing that number of $3.5 million as a possible projected deficit that we may face. And because that was a significant number, one we were concerned about, at that point, we decided to do things a little bit differently and have more people involved in thinking things through and have more collaborative approach and come up with better answers than just a few people could by themselves. And then what has been changing over the past 2 months, and literally right into this week. And this is common. These numbers change. We get better information as we get closer to further along in the year. So that's not new how they change, but they have been changing. They've been changing week by week. So in our revenue, tax receipts have become clearer and clearer. Those tax numbers we were concerned about have sorted out quite well. Town meeting decisions affected our budget, local receipt estimates, Chapter 70 adjustments. Those have all been happening over the past 2 months, as they always do at this time of year. Our expenses have been shifting as well as pictures become clearer and clearer. Transportation, special education, and the anticipated cost of our new transportation service contract, as those have sorted out, we've gotten firmer and firmer numbers. So projections, which are more conservative and have more variance earlier in the school year, are now sorted out. Same with special education tuition, personnel. At that point, we didn't know what lane increases to expect because that deadline isn't until January for the upcoming year. At that point, we didn't have a tentative agreement with the paraprofessional unit like we do now, so we know concretely what those costs may be. Will be, I should say, for the upcoming year, or we should be better able to project those costs because we know what those costs will be for paraprofessionals this year on personnel because of the tentative agreement. And then adjustments made between last year and this year come clearer during the fall, and then also changes in the GIC as well. So all those things are what I want to express is this large group of variables that we budget conservatively, project conservatively as we're further out, and as those things come clearer and clearer, that sort of gap on the projection narrows down until we have actual numbers. And that's what we've been doing over the past few months. So now we come to the part of the presentation where I'm hoping I will be clearer. or clear, because it gets pretty complicated. But what I want to show folks is how things have changed over time. Okay, we're going to start with revenue. What you have here is first our budget from this current year, FY20 special town meeting, the final approval of our budget, which essentially was is finalized in November, but only has a small adjustment from what was approved in the spring. We have the original FY20 override plan. So what we planned 3 years ago and was the plan projections for during the override, okay? And then the adjusted plan, what we looked at that point in December. So, and I'll talk about this part as well. But as you can see, there's a difference between this line, so total revenue, which was our original plan, and this line, what we knew in December. And so I just want to detail a few of those. What happened between those two times? Well, it was two years, so a lot happens in terms of just being clear about where we are on things. But the projected general appropriation revenue decreased due to uncertainty about tax receipts, fees, and development. Okay, so working with the town, we had a lower number in terms of what our revenue would be. Okay, the circuit breaker moved, and this is FY20. So between here and here, the circuit breaker moved from. Oh no, sorry, I have that wrong. We have a projected reimbursement amount for circuit breaker earlier in the year, and then in early December, the Department of Education gives us our actual number that we can use for next year. Our revolving fund reimbursements were taken off budget in FY20, so they were on budget at this first estimate, but now in reality they're off budget, so it was a revenue as well. So as a result, between our original plan in FY18 and this December, we had $1.5 million lower in projected revenue. Okay, that immediately creates a projected gap, a significant projected gap. Then going further, things get clearer and clearer. So in the beginning of January, we were getting our numbers clearer and clearer about revenue. So you see here, revenue increases due to more and more clarity on local receipts, the governor's budget in Chapter 70, and the general appropriation number was set. I'm simplifying things a little bit because this number has kept on changing until this week. But the point I'm trying to make is that changes happened from December to January, and at that point, revenue was $1 million less than 2018, but $500,000 better than it was in December. Okay, so at this point, in terms of revenue, the picture is getting better and better. Okay, and then we have expenses. So I'll do the same thing with expenses. So again, FY20, our current fiscal year budget, the original plan in 2018, and the plan and what we knew in December. So what changed between 2018 and December? Personnel increases were added in FY19 and 20, and those carried forward. Okay, so we had unexpected personnel increases in before this year, and now we have to apply those. They have carried forward in the budget, and they are added to FY21. Based on existing information in December, okay, our projections for special education, tuition, and transportation were higher than we originally made them in 2018. So there's an actual, so that's why the services primarily are increased. Okay, our projections were lower than the information we had at this point. Our supply, materials, and cuts made to help balance the budget in FY20 returned. In what we had to do to balance the 2020 budget was make cuts in supplies, materials, just prior to town meeting. We were hoping to return those cuts back into the budget, and so we accounted for them in December. Okay, and then also at that point, adding another change was 2 Clark Road cleaning and moving costs added to the school facilities budget as well. So you see that some increases in capital, I believe. Okay, so our revenue went up, or was getting better, but our expenses were getting worse at this point. Okay, we have more expenses here than we did here. That's not the good way. It's not a good way to go. And then again, as I said, the picture changes. It was changing weekly. Okay, but to give you a sort of snapshot in time, we were fine-tuning salaries at this point because we're getting more information about things I described before, in terms of on salaries, on projected salaries, and also on returning staff and attrition. Our services were decreasing the cost here, so it's lower here, the services were, because we're getting better information from the Department of Ed on special education and from our transportation partners. At this point, between December and January, we reduced projected expenses by $800,000. Okay, The variances we had in projections and the conservative estimates were becoming clearer and therefore narrowing. That's good news. Another piece we had to add, though, were the operating costs for leased buildings. So in the past, these have been taken off the top of our revenue number we get from the town. But in this case, being Clark Road, we're showing you them here so so you can understand the changes that were made by the impact on town departments for increases in operating costs for cleaning, maintenance, playground, groundskeeping, that sort of thing, for Clark Road and other buildings. So that's an increase in our cost as well that we didn't know and didn't account for in these earlier years, and then has adjusted between December and January. So let me get now to the upshot of all this. Okay, we took the revenues, looked at expenses, and now we're combining them together. So what we have here are programs. So on the top line is our total revenue. These are numbers from earlier. Okay, just summarized into one line. These are expenses broken out by our expense areas, our top line items there, which are bundled up from many different line items. Okay, and then oops, wait, I just gave away the story there. And then sorry. And then transfers to municipal departments, like I talked about Clark Road, and our expense total, and any gap. So we have a balanced budget, originally planned from this year, back in the spring. There's no gap here. The original plan for any override is also balanced as well, so no gap there. And then remember, we started making changes I just described in revenue and expenses, so these are summarized here. So the darkest moment we had in terms of gap between projections revenue and projection expenses was in December at $4.2 million for the shifts I was describing earlier. They combined into having a projected deficit of that much in December. Okay, remember that's bigger than the 3.5 we originally projected in November. And then moving forward with the numbers we have now, which are much more concrete, much more dependable, much more confident, are these numbers here. So our revenue has increased, as I described, by $500,000 from December to January. So we're at $125.8, really $0.9 million. Our personnel expenses have gone down slightly because we've become clearer in terms of just those exact costs. Some adjustments on for services, and that's primarily transportation and special education costs. And then bringing back the supplies from earlier and to make those. So at this point, in terms of our budget, before we're doing anything at all, okay, with our most solid numbers, before cost savings, any cuts, any changes in program and services, we have a $2.8 million gap. Okay, that's a projected gap. All right, and I'll show you now, and then and that's what we need to address and deal with. And I'll explain how we're doing that. You'll see in the next few slides how we've reduced that gap to $250,000. Okay, and so the gap we're now trying to be closing the next bit is $250,000, which at this point is very good news. So let me explain how we went from $2.8 million to $251,000 and the choices we made so far. So closing a $2.8 million gap, the initial steps that have closed the gap, they're really in four primary areas. Personnel. We've further refined personnel costs, so lowered our personnel costs by getting our real actual numbers, okay? Those numbers have become clearer and clearer as we go along. The most significant piece here is reduction of planned growth in staff. Okay, that's teachers and one school-based administrator that aren't in our system now, that because of enrollment growth at the high school, and so the ongoing and the enrollment growth we have had, we had planned for these increases 2 years ago, 2+ years ago. Okay, we no longer believe they are needed because of the influx of additional staff over the last few years, which I showed you earlier. Okay, we've also been able to close that gap because while in earlier January, these numbers have just improved, okay? Special education tuition in terms of what we estimate will be necessary for next year in terms of increases, and also transportation costs. Special education costs, but also we're going to have a new transportation management, and we expect, and those numbers have gotten better from our original estimates. Okay? We will continue forward the FY20 reductions that were made in supplies and materials in order to balance the FY20 budget. Okay? So that's a reduction that we are hoping not to incur, but we are. And then utility expenses for 2 Clark Road, they've been removed from a prior revenue allocation to this town side, and that's just the utility expenses of those costs. Those, I won't call them simple steps because they're moving away from plans and moving away from what we expected to be doing, okay? Especially numbers 1 and numbers 3, okay? But they add up to a significant dollar amount, which is $2.6 million about, which is essentially almost the entirety of the 2.8 million budget gap we face, the gap we face between revenues and planned expenses. Okay, it is it's a big deal. It's very good news I think it's very good news. It's hard to get here because the numbers have been changing and we've been looking at things very closely in order to plan well. But we've done a great job. So these are things that we're considering now. And when we were looking at a potential gap of $4 million or $3 million or earlier, or just recently as last week, $1.2 million of a real gap to close, we were looking at a variety of things. So we're still looking at a variety of things. I wasn't able to, and we got literally new numbers on Tuesday, and where we had specific plans to make specific cuts or specific cost savings and changes recently as late last week, because the numbers have changed just this week, we're not able to say, and literally have changed in our favor, okay, what the specific ones are. But I do want to share what we're considering, and these are targeted adjustments in staff and program and services. As I said before, we don't that these adjustments, if some of them are made or when some of them are made, remember we're at this point, in terms of what I'm recommending, we're trying to close a $250,000 gap, which is in a budget of $125 million. That is quite small. So we're looking at modifying some programs. One possibility is looking at modifying programs based on past experiences so they're better focused on their primary purpose. And by focusing them, we can reduce some costs, okay? Restructure and reduce district-wide PD, professional development, so teachers are not out of the class so often and substitute costs are lowered. We have significantly enhanced and made our professional development program much more robust this year. And we also have heard that while some teachers are out of the classroom more than they have in the past, some teachers are out of the classroom less than they have in the past. Other teachers are out of the classroom more, and we certainly want to adjust that to make sure that the professional development is high quality, but teachers are out of their classroom less. We're looking at cutting or consolidating positions in central office in line with other cuts relative to increases that have been made there since 2015. So there was quite a bit of concern about whether we would be looking at central office positions. That was always part of the plan. I omitted that in my original presentation on November 14th, which was just that, an omission, an error on my case, but we've always know and understand and appreciate the need to look closely at central office. We could potentially restructure and focus new teacher support at the pre-K to 8 and BHS to ensure that better differentiates between types of new staff. We could have the potential to consolidate small classes and a limited number of middle grade or elementary classes, and also at the high school. This is a common occurrence in districts across the Commonwealth and really perhaps across the nation, year to year. And I think Brookline has done in the past on a regular basis, but we haven't had to recently because we've been growing and growing. But it does make sense if it's a bubble class, or in this case, it's a class that is smaller of total students, that where we could consolidate to make those classes more consistent with classes across the district. We'll take a close look at the services line item to see if and where reductions can be made. The bulk of the services line item is transportation for special education and special education costs, as well as essential services, reimbursements to teachers, and things like that. We have the potential to reduce the budget in the Office of Educational Equity because this was the first year that that office had a budget, and we overestimated what the real needs would be there. And now that we have better information and better experience with it, we could maybe be able to cut some of or reduce that line item there. We also have the potential to focus summer language arts program and scopes that's targeted more effectively to students in need of support. Right now, it's quite a large program which captures a very wide range of students, and we could really zero in on a smaller group of students and really support those much better. Another thing we've been considering, but this may take more than a year to enact, is Brookline Adult and Community Education taking over the recreation and elective parts of our BHS summer school program, or also taking over, Parks and Rec also may be taking over our intramural program. Those folks are often better situated to run those programs than we might be in terms of managing them. And then also have the potential to reconfigure and clarify K-8 math support. What I want to stress is that principals, directors, coordinators have been involved in sorting out these possibilities, these approaches to target adjustments, and have thought through many others, and have really identified these as ones that have the lowest impact that are doable, that have the least impact on the program support service we provide, and are a reasonable approach. But I also want to stress at the same time, because of the progress we made in our budgeting and our projections, we do not need to make all of these at any one time. And then also school-specific savings that are likely to occur or can occur. Principals were really diligent about sort of this assessment analysis of, depending on the students they have, depending on adjustments in enrollment, depending on classes, depending on just how things have developed in terms of their schools, that their adjustments can be made, and FTE adjustments or service that provided. These vary school to school, and if we need to do these, they'll be finalized with each principal in the coming weeks, and we'll communicate with each person in effect. Let me give you an example of that. Say at a school, you have a large number of special education students in the 8th grade who are moving on to 9th grade. They will not need services in 9th grade. At that point, with such a large number of students moving on from that school should rightly and appropriately adjust its special education staff based on the fact that they're no longer, those services that those folks were providing aren't needed at that school specifically. And that's a type of adjustment, and that could be based on changing approach to math coaching or clarifying roles for different programs or responsibilities, and because as people age out or people move on or programs are improved, there can be adjustments in how we do things, and those are the types of things we're talking about there. Let me pause there. Thank you. That was a lot. I hope I was intelligible. If I wasn't, you had the opportunity to clarify, and I'm happy to add or any detail you need, or call up Mary Ellen to explain where I can't. Yes.
In the curriculum subcommittee recently, we were discussing scheduling. And I bring that up because in terms of adjusting staff,
Yes.
that can have very difficult effects on the schools. There were two problems that I recall. I mean, there were more than two problems, but related to this. One is that there are many teachers who are moving between schools, and that means that for parts of their day, they're not really working with students. I don't know how you deal with that, but when you adjust the schedule, you can certainly make that more problematic than it is now. I mean, it's already problematic. So I think that that's just one thing to keep in mind. The second thing I'd like to mention is there was one school where they were having scheduling problems because of conservatory. There were not enough available teachers at that point to run it for the whole staff through a number of days. And I guess those things came to mind because I think when you do what you're doing, which I think is a good thing, I'm not criticizing it, that whole effect on scheduling, that can have a huge effect on scheduling. The other thing, a couple of other things I wanted to mention.
Can I
First,
just say one thing about that quickly?
Yeah.
So you're exactly right. I mean, the complexity of our schedules at this point, because our schools, because they're K-8 schools, first of all, because they're as large as they are, and because of the shared staff. I mean, those are just a few of the pieces. But also the level of service and support we provide our students. All those pieces do make. I mean, it is not even Rubik's Cube. It's much more than that. And you're right that adjusting staff can hinder that or hurt that, it can also help it too. And one isn't, I mean, as obvious as the other, but for example, we know that, like you said, shared staff. I'll say this, our health, conservatory, music, visual arts, world language, all of those are shared in some way, shape, or form, to very different degrees. Every year we've been thinking about that and trying to figure out how to adjust that, and we haven't had much luck on it, honestly, yet. But, you know, and it remains a challenge. So it's work to be done. But in some ways we're a little bit at our wit's end on how to really remedy that. But adjustments of staff can help that as just as much as they can hurt. So it depends. It really requires the principals to be as involved in their scheduling there. And recently, a couple of years ago, when we had some person to talk about talk with coordinators about scheduling, they were talking about you know how do you make it more of a collaborative and group exercise, because if a few people are doing it, it's their perspective, but if a larger group of people have more perspectives, and it might help that way. So we'll continue that.
A couple of other things. When I was teaching, which I know was way back when, parents provided supplies for the children. I seem to recall that changed, and the school system began to provide more of the supplies. I'm talking now about elementary. We're providing more of the supplies, and I wondered whether my recollection was correct that we are providing the supplies to the students, as opposed to asking them bring a notebook and pencils and so forth. Is that
Both
accurate?
things exist still. I
Both
mean,
things.
we provide supplies and resources, obviously, at quite a high level, and we've had cuts in those. But not sure if parents have ever stopped or providing supplies when teachers ask.
Ms. Scotto, I've received a class list every single year. My daughter's in 7th grade now. Every single year for every single teacher for multiple children, we've received a class list with a request.
Okay. And the last thing I want to say is, in talking about finances, I think that we ought to, and this is not going to help us save money at this point, but we need to look at unfunded mandates. I'm thinking of the EL program, and that's something where the law has changed, which is forcing much more work at the school levels. And I know that Mindy Paolo has been stretched over what she has to do and what the EL teachers have to do. And I'm wondering if we can, at some point, study how much that is costing the school system, just as information to give back to the state. Because they don't seem to be aware that when they pass these laws, that we have to lay out a fair amount of money. So it just seems to me it might be worth reporting back to the state how much money we were spending each time they did this.
They don't seem to be aware of it, even though Ms. Charlevsky tells them every single time she can.
And even when they don't want to listen.
And she's pretty persistent, so I'm not sure why they're not listening. Yes, you're exactly. I don't know if we have the capacity to do that sort of analysis, but it certainly is an analysis I imagine other folks have done. I don't know for sure. But, just specific need you're talking about, we're well aware of it. Mindy and Meg Massini and I have talked about and really have a real, know what the cost would be to provide another staff member there, because of all our departments, that's one that certainly has grown tremendously and is virtually, like many of our departments, obviously the same size as it used to be, but it's something we're looking at. And that's the thing in terms of making strategic budget or resource choices is, where can we make choices in this budget or the next one in order to prioritize an area like that? I mean, we can always do that. It's a question of what priorities we have or what choices we're making. So that's something for the school committee to keep on working on and provide direction to us and that sort of thing. So, but that's certainly something we've looked at closely and I believe is really needed.
Mr. Perlman and then Ms. Charlevsky. And then Ms. Fetterspiel.
All right, I have a few questions. So starting on the slide, developing a balanced budget through target adjustments in staffing, program, and services.
Sorry,
I believe it's slide 34.
we did not put this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
We did not put slide numbers on here, although I promised I always would.
Some.
Okay, all right, there are some, right.
I ended up just marking them myself.
No,
All right,
someone write down page numbers are helpful, please. Sorry, Mr. Roman.
no problem. So on the closer look at the services line items to see if and where reductions can be made.
Yeah,
My understanding is the services budget's roughly $12 million. Are we any closer to knowing exactly what's in that budget? Because a concern that I've previously raised is that it's difficult to make informed decisions about cuts if we don't know exactly what the line items are within some of these budgets.
So Ms. Norman and I were looking at a pivot table not too long ago, like in the past week, looking at literally every single vendor or provider on that. And while I don't know, and so yes, the answer is we haven't done a very detailed analysis yet, but that's one of the things I said here. We'll continue to do that, and we'll report to you just what the major buckets are, and then break down even further than that as needed. My sense, and is that 70 or 80% of that, maybe I shouldn't, a large percentage of that is, as I said before, special education, tuition, transportation, and some fees, but we can, yeah.
The first $9 million is special ed tuition, transportation, and regular ed transportation, and
Wait, can you go slower?
the first $9 million of the $12 million is in special ed tuition, special ed transportation, regular ed transportation, and consulting services related to special education. And then the rest are a variety of different leases for computers is another large chunk, and then a smattering of other kinds of general contracts. So that budget line item is probably actually the tightest of all of them, but we'll have that information for you broken down by the expenditure that it's what the expenditure is and how we organize that. But just the big number is when we sorted the first account codes from largest to smallest, they were all special ed accounts, 3 out of the 4 anyway.
Thank you. Another question I have is regarding the reconfiguration and clarification of K-8 math support. And it's the question's not about math, but rather about literacy support. So at the last presentation we had, there was a fairly long discussion about literacy coaches. And I have often heard from the teachers with whom I have spoken that they don't all necessarily like having literacy coaches, and I'm not making any suggestions one way or the other than to say that I think it would merit exploration to perhaps add reconfiguring and clarifying K-8 literacy support. If we're going to do that on the math side, we should perhaps do that on the literacy side as well.
I think that makes sense. I do want to add a few things to the conversation. One, I mentioned earlier that the principal, as I asked the principals, what's the one or two things you really want to preserve at your school, or continue to build? 8 out of 9 of them said the same thing, and one said that this was their second priority, and that's the embedded professional development that is being done in the schools today. That's the literacy and math support that our teachers are getting. And I agree with you. It's, like anything in the world, there isn't a unanimous opinion on this one. But there are plenty of teachers who you often don't hear from, but who are benefiting tremendously from that support. It varies. It isn't a perfect solution, and the principals do see it as one of the, and it's widely regarded. Instead of one and done, or instead of shipping people out, out of a school district to get professional development, as a very effective form of helping teachers work together, collaborate, learn from each other, see across different grades, that sort of thing. I'm saying clearly that we continue to improve it. It needs a real look and an assessment of it, and it is a much more complicated picture than simply some teachers don't like it. And it's well worth looking at, so I agree with you.
And then my last question on this, there's a line about reducing the budget in the Office of Educational Equity. based on experience from this year. Can you elaborate on what that experience has been?
Sure. Just that, I mean, one of the experiences is that Dr. Felice Wernham is an incredibly talented educator and leader, and because she's leading a lot of the professional development with teachers, also educators, that amount of resources we thought she would need, and she thought she would need, in supplies, materials, that sort of thing, just isn't as significant as she needed. We were quite generous in just allocating hundreds of thousands of dollars for supplies, materials, training, and sort of thing. But because most of that's happening in house, and the supplies and materials needs aren't as much as we anticipated, then that can be allocated somewhere else.
So I'm really pleased that we are where we are today. It certainly feels like we can breathe a lot easier. I guess I would still encourage us to do efficiencies where we can do them, because there are things such as the English language learners where we do want to expand, where we need to, because it's the right thing to do. We're asking staff to do things that are just almost impossible. And so I think that, where there are opportunities, where class consolidations can happen, as long as they're not affecting education, affecting students' lives and teachers' lives, I think that's really important. And so I appreciate this list, because I think it's some of the things that you would look at along with other things. The other question I have, do we know yet, when will we won't know the GIC number till March. I keep on, well, you do know it.
We know it. We do know it, and they've assured us that there's enough in there that it won't be changing, and that we should.
I know, but what are we estimating, and how much has it come in at? 5%. Oh. Okay. I thought we don't get that number till March.
We sat with Mel on this, and really, they said, really, this is the number. We don't see it moving.
Okay. We will be back here in March.
They're great
Thank you.
partners.
We'll still be here. We'll just still be
Michelle
here.
Lupsky, just him responding to you, just a quick on your comment. I really think that's wise counsel. Just because, I don't know how to say this well, but I can't say any better than you did. It just makes sense to look at that, because there are things we're choosing not to do right now that may be very important, or are important, okay? And so to make adjustments in order, and those small adjustments can add up to bigger things that we then can do. And one thing I think is very important that we are thinking hard about, with support of Deputy Superintendent Casey Miller and OSS, is how do we do a better job of supporting our students emotionally and behaviorally, and how do we support schools in doing that? And this isn't about a new program, okay? I'm very wary of any approach that says these students need a program and sort of sequester them that way. But we may be able to do things differently we're not doing right now. And so I think it's wise to look at what we're doing here, and these and others. I mean, if we want to move away from some of this in a adjustment way, and that can add up to something we can do more significant, especially in that area. So I think it's wise counsel.
Thank you.
Ms. Fishbill?
I just wonder if we could spend a minute talking about a non-reduction in staff. I'm just a little confused about that, so I just want to be clear if I can. So you said if there is further refinement of personnel costs and reduction of plan growth form, so that
I'm sorry, just where are we?
closing,
One slide
One
ahead.
slide before that
before
one.
this.
Before that. Here.
Yes.
Okay.
The A.
personnel, under personnel. So I'm taking it to mean that you don't see a reduction in staff.
Not a reduction in existing staff. We want to preserve who we have, that sort of thing. There may, and
Okay.
that's separate from adjustments we're talking about on the following pages. Okay.
Right, because that's what, and then on slide 6, you said any staff cuts will happen primarily through attrition. So if there is attrition and and the position is not backfilled or filled, then that would be a reduction in staff. So I'm just trying to be clear about what we're saying in terms of staffing.
So part of this is just sort of, how do I say this? Part of the process of developing it. So what I'm saying is earlier on, literally a week ago, we thought that it was likely to have reduction in existing staff, okay? And that's sort of where that comes from. At this point, we because of where we are very much more on this than on that, okay? But what I want people to know is that, that if there are any, I'm just trying to be truthful, you know, if there are any of those, they'd be focused on that rather than cutting existing staff that aren't moving on for some reason, okay? That's where we prioritize. That's where we would try to work from as a starting point and hopefully an ending point. That's our priority. But I don't anticipate at this point that there would be a need for any significant existing staff cuts.
Yeah, so I would just, again, emphasize that if someone retires or moves or resigns, that's not where we're looking for cuts. I mean, that those positions need to be filled.
Yeah, I think an example might be, say you have a program, I don't want to name one because I don't want to, call people out, okay? A program that's providing support to teachers and students, and it may be one of these adjustments that we're looking at right here, okay? And a person's retiring, okay? So that gives us an opportunity to, instead of focus on number 3 of these, I'm making these up, focus on number 4, because there's an opportunity there because so a staff member is moving on, retiring, and so that might make sense at this point, might help us make the decision on focusing in that area as opposed to another area. So it's it's a reduction in terms of the way we want to deliver that program or that service, and because staff members are moving on, we would use that opportunity in a sense.
Okay. I just to kind of say it one more time, there's a difference between reduction in staff and attrition, or actually attrition could lead to reduction in staff, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and that we need to be aware of that. And that we're not, at this point, asking people to do a reduction in staff.
No, you're not.
And if there's attrition, that's because decisions have been made, but not because of a request for reduction in staff, somehow.
So are you-
You know what I'm trying to say?
I'm not sure if you're trying to get me to promise something. If you are, I can't.
Well, I'm not asking you to promise. I'm trying to say this is what we're saying. I mean, in this budget, this is what this budget is not based on the fact that we will have a reduction in staff. And if there is attrition, if there are retirements or resignations, that doesn't mean we won't fill them. It would be based on something else, not because of a mandate from us, from school committee.
Right, strategic choice, a priority.
Yes. I think the distinction, maybe, let me try.
Yeah, try.
A distinction would be, so if, say we have a vice principal that retires, I think what Suzanne is saying, that we wouldn't say, opportunity, let's have one less vice principal.
Yeah, no, we would, the example I was giving before, the program, it was, if it's something we're considering for reasons, that we have a planned need or, an improve, how do I say this? So yeah, it wouldn't be just, we would not do that. We would not cut a position simply because all of a sudden someone's retiring. It's got to be based on a plan. It's got to be based on, be purposeful, be thoughtful. Yeah.
So would it be, is what you're meaning is that, as we're talking about like consolidating classes that are chronically under-enrolled at BHS. So if we have, I don't even know what languages we have. Say we have Russian, and in Russian there are only 4 students who take that class.
Okay.
That might be an opportunity to say we're not going to have Russian anymore. But if one of the teachers who teaches Chinese decides to retire, would we still consolidate the Russian class? Or you're saying, no, we would not do that, and instead we would consolidate and have one less Chinese class?
Now I understand. Yes, in that case, okay. And that could happen in elementary, and that could happen at BHS, okay? At that point, you are reducing staff, okay? Yeah, I mean, yes, that is a case where we reduce staff, and it's based on that strategic decision or that planful decision, adjustment, whatever you want to call it, that it no longer makes sense to have 3 sections at a school that are much smaller than we have across the district. And that's a case where, and that does have, then we work along with the BU and abide by the contract in terms of how that happens. And that's why, somewhere here, that process, it takes some time to sort out, because we really have to follow the letter of the contract on that. Yeah. But that is an example.
Okay.
We made it, and to clarify, Ms. Federspiel, yes, that is an example of where that could happen.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean, not just, but you still have the same number of students at BHS, so perhaps you would not, maybe you would consolidate or eliminate the Russian language class, but you may need to add a Chinese language class because in fact, our students the numbers aren't being reduced. So you still have the same teaching load, or, you know what I'm saying? You still need the same number of teachers.
Or not. I mean, I think if we have lower, because one of the things we talked about in previous meetings was when we had lower enrollment in classes at BHS, maybe that was a place to harvest opportunity and free up.
Yeah, no, I understand you might consolidate classes, you might eliminate classes, but you still have more students than we've had before at the high school, so that if we're talking about the high school, you really wouldn't be eliminating positions, the total, because somebody has to teach those students. You might get a number or two here or there because you can add to a class, but anyway, it's just something to think about.
To me, the high school is, a big
I know, the high
place,
school's
and there's a
something else.
lot of moving parts. But I do think we need to, I think we have said that we wouldn't run classes under 15, and I think that's a really important piece, so that, if there were a class under 15, it wouldn't be run. That, by doing that, sometimes you consolidate, and so you have 0.1 FTE less, 0.2. It depends. I think we also plan for a higher amount, and I think those are the numbers that you were talking about earlier, of increased staff at the high school because of the planned increase. And as we all know, when you're building, people tend to not come as much. And when they're done, they come a lot. But for right now, we should take advantage of that and staff appropriately. So I think it's basically being prudent and fiscally prudent on how we spend the money that we have to give the best education we can, but also to be careful in terms of how we're spending it.
My questions were related to these two same slides. When you go back to the one before, yes, and when you have 1A, as you talk about those cuts, or however you want to describe them.
Really, reduction in planned growth. That's
Reduction in planned growth. And then you go to the next slide. Are any of these things included in 1A? Okay.
Yeah, so that's really important. We were able to get, just using these four things, nothing on the next slide, we were able to reduce the gap, the projected gap, by $2.6 million almost. And we're actually in a, interesting place, because at this point in previous budgets, we've had a gap actually much higher than that, okay? And I do want to address one thing. I think it's, we've done a lot of work on this, and folks have done a lot of thinking about this, and the community's been aware of it along the way, I think it's fair to say, well, why did we get involved in this, okay? I was talking to someone, I'm not good at analogies, okay, but let me try this one, because someone shared with me this morning, and they did it well, so we'll see how it goes, but wish me luck. The idea, if you're on train tracks, and we all walked on train tracks at some point, not a real smart thing to do, okay, don't try this at home, all right, it's not a safety thing, okay? But if you see a light coming at you, okay, and you're near some train tracks, it could be like two guys on the old trolley thing pumping along with a couple lanterns, okay? It could be a freight train, it could be a career train, or it could be a bullet train, okay? My approach on that would be to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I do believe that by being open and aware of what may be coming, okay, and not sure of it, and really working together in a way that I think is different from what we've done in the past, folks were able to take greater ownership of and look more closely at their schools or departments, and be thoughtful about it. I do believe that if we had if things hadn't fallen our way, and there's really no way of knowing at that point which way they're going to go, especially with state budgets up in the air and that sort of thing, and the Student Opportunity Act, and that to plan this case and be thoughtful about it, rather than at this point, if things have gone the wrong way, and then there are a few of us trying to make significant adjustments or cost savings in a small room, that would not have been wise, prudent, or strategic. So, so I think it's a good thing that we worked on this and that we're in very good shape right now.
So my other question was, in the budget that you've planned to this point, are there have you included some of those things that we've talked about throughout the year of needing or wanting to add? And so things like additional supports at the schools for social emotional learning, additional guidance counselors, work on some of the priorities for special education like dyslexia, growing the Otherwise program at Heath. As we have these priorities and things that are new or different than we've done, is there any build in the current budget to allow for that, or?
So I'll just say a couple of specific, because like growing the support for students with autism spectrum disorder and similar complex needs at Heath, yes, that is in the budget. The other ones you mentioned specifically are not at this point. Really, this is at this point a sort of a stasis budget. But I think we need to consider those and figure out where we could make adjustments in order to do some of that. If that's, I would like to, especially emotional behavioral support. I think it's a real need. I mean, it's not me. I'm speaking for many others, I believe. So I think that's an area where I think we might want to be strategic and build it.
Ms. Federspiel had another question.
I'm sorry. There has been planning and thinking about it. So we've been working on it and have some, and I'm asking folks as well, but we do have some real, the basics of a couple of approaches that might be helpful in that. So it's not like we've been thinking about that and working on it. We just haven't made a budget decision to prioritize it yet.
And so just to follow up on that, so as we're thinking about, we have a public hearing next week on the budget. Is that the time that you would want feedback on those sorts of items, or when do you anticipate having information about newer,
I mean, obviously any feedback and thoughts are helpful,
Sure.
right? But I think it's important also at this point for folks to hear about priorities and what decisions people want to make and what choices are important to them. I think it's helpful to the committee. It's helpful to me and my staff, but certainly for folks to talk about what's near their hearts and and not only what to preserve, but what we can build towards. Because I think we actually have an opportunity here to do that, and can do it wisely. So I think it's worth thinking about and getting put on. Yes.
So just a couple of things. I hope they're quick. One is just to add on to that. Again, we've talked about budgeting at the school level, and so instead of from up above, some office saying, "Oh, we have an extra bit of money," which is a wonderful discussion to have. We never thought we'd be here, but that might be.
We're not really
we don't
there.
yet.
But if we do get there, anyway,
I
I would.
Flexibility, but we're not. It's not like we're.
Yeah, I would just urge again the opportunity for schools to have some say.
So, thank you. I do want to clarify that because I've come to believe that the two-letter word "we" it can be often misconstrued. And I talked about this at a meeting we had with the Brookline Education Foundation, and a lot of folks nodded their heads, so I'll try it again. They nodded their heads in agreement. When I say "we," I want people to understand that it's not "we" like on this floor. Okay, it is "we" meaning principals and coordinators and directors. It means teachers, but we do have very limited structures and ways of working collaboratively with teachers on decisions like this. We don't have, other districts have systems and structures and ways of doing it. We have limited, and teachers and principals have limited ways of doing that. Other than talking to
And school site council would be a possibility.
That is one.
That has representation from community administration and staff at a school.
Just a few folks. I agree entirely. Absolutely, it's one system we do have in place. So I guess what I'm getting at is when I'm saying "we" in that, I'm thinking of schools. I'm thinking of school leaders. I'm thinking so, and to build on that, I really to see the process this time we, as you know, we're trying to move towards that. Mary Ellen can talk about it at a different time, just these systems in terms of OpenGov, and you'll be learning more about that. That allows folks to have easier access to their budgets and to how they're being spent down and sort of thing. That's an important move for the district to have, okay? It allows them to have more ownership. But also this process with people going in and looking at what they are currently spending, what they're currently using things on, and being more part of the conversations, specifically across similar roles. So principals speaking with principals more than they have in the past, in group settings and whatnot, I think has helped develop, has made forward progress in ownership in that way. And that, combined with better systems to help them do it, helps us move in that direction. So it's helps us report in that, helps us make decisions on that level. So I think we're making progress and also have a ways to go.
And I just had this one is a quick question. I assume that under personnel item, the amount of money, that includes the new contracts that will be coming down the road with our educators. I mean, includes,
Yes, we
I mean, not the percentage, but some
in budgets, we always account for anticipated increases, contractual increases, yes.
COLAs, that kind of thing. And then the last thing I have right now is on PD costs. Is it possible to get that broken down? Like when we talk about professional development, I have no idea what that money is and how it's spent. I mean, is it mostly substitute money? Is it? Oh.
Yet? Can we say yet?
Yet. I like the yet. It would be helpful at some point to take a look at that and see how we're spending our money for professional development.
So just to help, so our chart of accounts, as you folks know, but maybe the general public hasn't lined up with the state's Department of Education's chart of accounts, meaning how are we spending money in what areas, in what different categories for many years. And Mary Ellen and her small team there in finance has been making great strides, even more strides this year to line those up. And that allows us to report as we're obligated to, but also pull reports much more easily as we get that sorted out. So places are, so they're organized in a way that makes sense, but also follows legal guidelines.
Thank you. I know more to come. Any further questions?
Let me just talk about what I didn't get to was road ahead. So in the short term, we'll get further input from the school committee and from the public hearing February 6th next week when the public can speak on the budget. We'll also have in the following week more detail available publicly in terms of the numbers, narratives, and that sort of thing. We'll complete final decisions on trade-offs, cost savings, cuts in the weeks and months to come, as guided and supported by the school committee. If necessary, we'll begin conversation with any staff whose position will be impacted by the budget. That's important for us to do it in a compassionate and direct face-to-face way. If and when that happens, I just want people to know, and saying that, I want people to understand like we are thinking on that level, and we're very aware of if that's the case for any reason that we need to treat our staff, any staff, in a conscientious and caring way. The school committee will vote on the total town meeting request on February 13th. It's been scheduled to, I should say. And then the school committee also would vote a total bottom line budget of $126 million, $112,627 prior to annual town meeting, allocating the personal and expense budget. That's short term. Those are sort of steps from here. Probably some more steps there that I haven't gotten. And then I think even more importantly, I want the committee to really begin to think about where we go from here long term. We talked a lot about tonight about returning to a budgeting process that makes annual adjustments in programs, services, and schedules and staffing on a school-by-school basis in response to learning more about programs, the needs of students, capacity, that sort of thing. Just a sort of regular approach, not just what we are adding or what we change, what we taking away, but really looking closely at how we do things and whether we need to make adjustments on an annual basis. And then more importantly, even is developing a strategic plan. It's very difficult. That would help focus our work, identify a limited set of essential priorities across our schools in the district, and provide a clear roadmap for making budgetary and resource decisions. Just to build on that, we do need to be more planful and strategic in making budget decisions and allocating resources. We really want to move away from how we spend the money we have and we ask on an annual basis to some questions that I just would just put out there in terms of being strategic and planful. Is where do we want to go? And then this really ties, this next question is just about our mission. What do we need to do to ensure that every student develops the skills and knowledge to pursue a productive and fulfilling life, to participate thoughtfully in a democracy and succeed in a diverse and evolving global society? So finally, what are we trying to accomplish? And then following on that, what people, support, services, programs, and systems do we need in place to get there, where we decide we're going? And what choices do we need to make? What will we stop doing, start doing? What do we need to do better? What do we need to continue? How will we know if those things are working? And then what funding do we need, and how should we allocate resources so we can accomplish all this? So in many ways, the what funding or resource do we have is the last question as opposed to the first question. And Brookline has done this before. I think we need to return back to it. And my sense is that any new superintendent with the support of the school committee would be able to lead this approach. So, thank you, folks. More to come. Appreciate your time.
Ms. Wolf-Leopold, we have an update on the Brookline High School expansion project.
Thank you, and thank you to Ms. Norman and Mr. Lummis in preparing the budget. I would more ask the question of sort of, do people have questions on the BHS project, because it's incredibly large and complicated. There are kind of two things that I would say are useful. One is that I've brought you all pictures. There are all kinds of color pictures, if you haven't seen them before, of lots of demolition spaces. So I will hand these out to you guys. I have 4 here, so if anybody wants extras, actually I have 3 because I need one. But if anybody wants extras, we can get those for you. I mean, I think the bottom line on the project is twofold. One is that given the complexity, it's actually going incredibly well. If you think about it, there are at least 5 separate projects that are within this one project, which is the corner of the 115 Greeno space, the 111 Cypress space. There's work being done at Tappan. There's work being done on the Cypress Field, work being done at OLS back and forth. So there's just a tremendous amount going on. And I think if you look at some of these photos, all of which are available online if anybody wants them on the BHS project website, it's really an extraordinary effort. And as our building commissioner, who is our co-chair, George Cole, calls it, it's a big kid project, which I thought was cute. It used to be a big boy project. We've now moved him to big kid project. I think in terms of the timeline, there have been challenges, obviously, with the MBTA, things going, relatively quickly in MBTA world, but also slightly slower than the timeline. And so some of the conversation is about where are places where time can get made up on the project to continue to hit the January date, a year from the January, but then the more important, the move-in date in September that we're aiming towards. So I just think it's important they are very clear that there's a big difference between moving in October and moving in August, let's say. So those 2 months are not just 2 months. So they're really clear. They're really clear. I might say it every week or two. Maybe every 2 weeks at this point. It used to be every week. I think the high school staff and the administration have done an incredible job trying to keep an actual educational program running on this massive construction site. The only other thing that I'll say, and we've alluded to it before, is that there continue to be a very hot construction market that the high school project is bidding in. And so almost all of the project is bought out, not all of it yet. But one conversation that we will probably have after the February break is, if there are places where we need to value engineer even further, then that will be something that, at least comes here for a discussion so we see what that looks like. I just want to give you a couple examples of the level of detail that that's gone into this. One is that when we've thought about spaces, not only are there kind of big questions about spaces, but it's down to kind of the micro level of looking at bids and saying, to what extent is this line item for this trade higher than we expected? And if we were to rebid it, what kind of savings do we think we could get? And if we don't think we could get savings, why would we rebid it? And if we could get savings, how much would they be? And how much, impact would it have on the timeline? And that has happened for literally, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of items. And we've gone through them, and then the other thing that I will mention is that there's been pretty careful cost calibration. I know there's sort of the sense that it's this, Lexus building or, which it's going to be beautiful, but I also just want folks to know that there's been a lot of thought at very specific line item detail about cost. So just as one example, the terrazzo floors are significantly more expensive than linoleum. And so we had the architects and project manager go through a life cycle analysis to say how often would it have to be replaced and how much would it cost us operating costs, so that we're not making kind of penny wise, pound foolish decisions like that. And again, there are hundreds and hundreds of those if anybody is really curious about how high the tile should go up on the wall. And then after that, it should be drywall, because up until a certain point, kids are bumping into it, and lacrosse sticks and hockey sticks and elbows. You really do need something durable, but then tiling an entire wall, as you may know if you've ever done your house, is much more expensive than having drywall after a certain point. So, really down to that level of decision. So, so I think there's a lot of excitement. I think there's a lot of agreement that that it's coming into shape more or less the way it's envisioned. At the same time, we are facing, a pretty substantial budget challenge. And so all of those pieces are being done, just so you know, so that when we do have harder conversations, just know that ground has been laid. But I think there's some pretty exciting spaces, and it's fun to watch the educators' eyes light up when they see the plans and see, as it's coming into view, some of the more colors and some of the types of furniture that are getting considered. There'll be furniture in the atrium for people to sit in. So there's kind of a lot of going on at that level. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the more formal presentation will be after February break, and we would have the architects and the OPM come for that.
So, thank you, and thank you for all your hard work on this project, because I know it's a labor of love. It has to be, because of the hours that you spend.
A lot of hours.
Yes, it's a lot.
It would be more helpful if we had, PSB fifth floor staff assigned to it, and it was not requiring volunteer official
Absolutely.
time. But
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm otherwise occupied.
yeah. Yeah, we miss the person that used to occupy Mr. Lemus's position. Because I'm spending a lot of time on it, which is not appropriate. It's much more appropriate for being a professional, but I'm doing my best.
So, but my question actually has to do with the transportation board and the bike lanes and where that process is at. And
Yeah, it's a good
maybe you
question.
could talk a little bit about what some people are thinking.
That's a good question. So just to rewind the clock, you might remember that at two different points in the process, we all collectively have looked at the costs of structured parking and costs in terms of dollars and costs in terms of open space, and have collectively sort of come to a place where we said we don't want to invest millions of dollars in underground parking at the STEM building. This was 2 years ago. And then last year, the end of last year, that we did not want to push really hard to keep, a couple dozen surface parking spots right next to the MBTA, but rather to have more of a plaza for people to inhabit, so for people, and not a handful of cars. So both of those were approved, and then and the discussion with the transportation board, which was enormously supportive of not paying significant money for structured parking. The trade was that they would replace all of the teacher spots that were lost within walking distance. And so I think the next step on that, obviously walking distance can't be a mile. And so the next step on that is to sit down. I think Mr. Gillis is working on this with Mr. Mason at the high school and Mr. Crane to sort of sort out where those spots would be. Then what happened this last month was that the Bicycle Advisory Committee had a variety of improvements to 5 streets. They were quite beautiful. I have to say they were beautiful. There were lots of plantings involved and protected bike lanes and buffers, and is much more sort of a lot of beautiful ideas, none of which were costed into the project or when it was envisioned, and the project is significantly over. The other thing is that the recommendations spanned past where the project was envisioned. So the project, if you can imagine Cypress Field, is 3 sides of Cypress Field, which is Davis, Greeno, and Tappan. Pretty minimal. There's streetscape work that was envisioned sort of to open up the sidewalks because kids would be going back and forth and that sort of thing. But there was not extensive work that was budgeted in for paint and, bike lanes and that sort of thing, and sort of planters and divides and baffles, whatever they call them. I don't recall what they're called. So at any rate, so that number 1, the plants were beautiful. Number 2, they were very expensive. Number 3, there was no money in the budget for them. And number 4, there were a number of places where they further reduced parking, kind of a third reduction in parking. Again, the Transportation Board committed to replacing those spots within walking distance, and that was part of the discussion. But again, I think we need to sort of see where those spots are, and we need to have that discussion. I will also say that since that time, the Davis Avenue neighbors had some concerns because essentially, again, if you can imagine, you're driving along the park's on your left, and the houses are on your right on Davis Avenue. Right now, the parking is next to the field, and the proposal from the Transportation Board that they voted actually was to flip it. They voted it. And so that the bike lane would be against the field and that the parking would be against the houses. There are a number of concerns about sight lines and people backing out. So the people on Davis Avenue do have some concerns. In addition, when you move, it seems like a simple swap, but when you put parking on the side of the houses, you actually lose a lot of spots because of the driveway and curb cuts. So the Davis Avenue neighbors have put in a request to kind of open the conversation again. And so at any rate, I think from our perspective, the next step is to understand much more fully the map of where the teacher spots will be. And they're aware that our guideline is a half a mile. That was something that we talked about when we...
Is it a half or a quarter mile?
It was a half a mile because Baker and CCS are at half a mile. BHS is at 0.6 miles. So we're going to actually do this in a minute with the Driscoll project. But we can... Did we put the slide in about the other buildings? We didn't put the... Okay, so at any rate, we can talk about what the other buildings are at. At any rate, we'll talk about this in a minute, but the last time we talked about this, it was what are the kinds of guidelines that we have in mind, and a half a mile, which is where 3 of our buildings already are, seemed to be about the limit of what we were willing to do on Driscoll and Baldwin, again, given that Baker and CCS are at half a mile and the high school is at 0.6 miles. So that was sort of...
And was there any traffic study done assuming these bike lanes? I mean, did anybody think that maybe it might be important to do a traffic study in terms of the high school and the additional kids and staff that are going to be there, and the traffic,
yeah, I don't
and
know.
these bike lanes?
I don't know.
I think this is a real problem.
I'm not part of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, so I don't know.
Right, but I think I understand you're not did the Bicycle Advisory Committee pass it, or the Transportation
Board?
So they did that without doing any kind of traffic study?
I don't want to say that they did it without doing a traffic study. What I'm trying to say is that I don't know.
Okay.
So that's a question that you're more than welcome to ask them. Nancy Heller, Select Board Member Heller, was one who was kind of running point on this, so she might have more information than I do.
When you're talking about the bike lanes and additional costs and plantings and things, is the decision about whether that happens and how it's funded, is the expectation that that would come out of the project?
So what was said at the Select Board meeting, at the Transportation Board meeting, is that there's a pretty minimal amount in the budget for additional markings and plantings and that sort of thing. And so there may be other sources of revenue that the Transportation Board may be able to access in terms of grants or other things, or I don't want to speculate where it would come from. It also might need to be phased over time, may not all happen at once. And so that seemed to be kind of the implementation piece seemed to be a little bit further out. But it was stated and recognized that there'd be probably a minimal amount of it that came out of the high school project budget, just given that it was sort of from a basic repainting, not all of the changes.
Did the Transportation Board ask if the schools were in favor of this?
No, I think the conversation was about the building, was about the parking spots, and the commitment of them being within walking distance was about as far as it got.
Yeah, I just wanted, I believe we heard a little bit ago that there's some concern about the cold getting into the building or frozen pipes or something in the high school.
Oh, yeah. So there's,
can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yes, well, there was a lot of fun. There was an unintentional water feature in the atrium of the high school the Friday before winter break. And so there was a fair number of people who kind of rushed to the scene, if you will, to stop our water feature from flowing down the stairways from the burst pipe. It got fixed. What happened was that if you can kind of imagine, it's a little bit of a rabbit warren in the high school. A lot of changes have been made to that building over time. And so what was the way that it was explained to me was that when a number of the external walls were taking off, things that had been internal walls or had never been really intended to be full external walls, or places where heat had been shut off, cold air was getting in. So this happened, but the team sort of jumped into place, and the Monday of Christmas week, which I think was the 23rd, there were many people on the scene, dealing with, ServPro and the contractors and the OPM and the building department. So lots of people came together. It does seem to be mostly mitigated, and the funds are coming from insurance. They sort of thought they had it, and then I want to say about a week and a half ago, there was a second pipe that burst. And again, that was the same problem, which is that, except in this instance, they had a subcontractor break through a wall. So what they put in place was a series of measures around, subcontractors not being able to break through walls without explicit approval from someone at Scansco. So each time they've kind of ratcheted up. I think they were crawling through, spaces to try to find different places, and they had thermometers throughout different parts of the building and above the ceiling, so kind of to measure that. But at any rate, there isn't a project impact on the cost, and Mr. Mason would prefer to not have water features, but other than that, said that for the most part it was manageable.
And then we've heard a little or a lot about increased costs that are somewhere, that the escalation costs and the additional building costs are around the 8-10%, and that wasn't the numbers we were expecting when we were budgeting it. Are you having conversations about, is the expectation, as feed into the next conversation we're having, we realize, we all know that finding $4 million in a project is incredibly difficult to do. And so when are we, we're having that conversation in March, and then.
So we've been having it all along, and I think, again, to the level of having the head of the science department come in and say, well, I don't really need locks on all of these cabinets. I'm happy to do it, open shelves with some, and I'm not even sure these need to be closed doors. They can be completely open. So kind of trimming costs at that level in the, $50,000, $100,000 level. Things like, do we need shades on every single window, including windows that don't even get any sun? That sort of stuff. Like, let's just really go down to the more micro level. So all that has been happening all along. I think the question is, are there bigger chunks of the project that we may need to more significantly scale back? So, for example, there are places where we were going to completely gut one of the locker rooms. Do we completely gut the locker room, or do we more or less kind of make it very nice but essentially patch it up, right? So you kind of do new tile, new paint, new lights, so kind of freshen it up so it's a really beautiful, welcoming space, but it isn't necessarily gutted, so you don't have to redo all the plumbing. So I think what's going to happen, part of why this is taking a long time, as you can imagine, with a $206 million project across 5 different buildings, is going through at this level of detail is taking a tremendous amount of time. And so I think they are trying to come up with, number one, where are we on the budget now that we're getting the last rounds of bids in, and number two, where are the places where we've kind of taken the low-hanging fruit or maybe even the middle-hanging fruit, and we might need to kind of more significantly sort of think about things. So that's the end of February.
So is that a good segue into the Driscoll project then?
Okay. So first of all, I want to introduce both Philip Gray from JLR Architects, who you all know well, and also Jim Rogers from Left Field in the back, who is our owner's project manager. What? Who is just coming on board, drinking from the fire hose. I think it's hard to join a project. I'm sure he's never heard that before. Join a project that has been well underway. So I think there are 4 things we want to do today, and I can't believe we're running ahead of schedule, but it's incredibly exciting. I know. Why do I say these things out loud? There are 4 things we want to do. One is just give an update, and specifically there's a decision that we want to put before the committee on parking, but just in general, so you all have an update about what's happening. And so Philip is going to take us through that. While we're here, let's do a project update. I think the second thing we want to do is clarifying questions on this from anybody on the committee, so this PowerPoint. Then we'll have, I think we've slated for public comment, right, on this issue. And then fourth, sort of a conversation, deliberation, and any other questions that people have or things that they want to put on the radar screen. So if that sounds okay, those kind of 4 things. Okay. So let me just start by saying that the level of community, but I'll hand this over to Philip in a minute, but just the level of input that has been solicited and received on this project in a month is pretty exciting and pretty incredible. There have been at least 3 or 4 days with educators, and Philip will tell you about what's happened in those 3 or 4 days with the teachers, which has been pretty exciting. There have been 2 building committee meetings of 18 people. There are METCO representatives, CPAC representatives, neighbors, you name it. Everyone's on that, which is why they're impossible to schedule. We've had 1 public forum this week with about 40 plus people, and there's another one next week. And we've sent out a lot of mailings, so 800 plus physical mailings went out. We're doing night meetings, morning meetings, after drop-off meetings, meetings at Driscoll, meetings at Town Hall. They really are trying to capture as many people as possible because we know that was a concern. So I'm sorry Sharon isn't here because she asked it last time. I think the last thing that I will say is that the Building Advisory Committee has 2 sort of subgroups to it. One is a solid line, the other one's sort of a dashed line. The solid line is a design working group, and Philip might tell you a little bit about that as well. And that is a subcommittee that's focused on classrooms and hallways and drapes. I don't even know what they're going to do. They're going to do a lot more detail, and there are going to be 5-6 workshops that are 3 hours each. The principal is on that, building commission. So anyway, that's sort of a very, very kind of deep level of detail over the next number of months. And then the second subcommittee, which is the dotted line, is the Playground and Field Committee. And we just sort of had a kickoff last night. Phil will talk a little bit about that as well. It was a great kickoff. And what's happening there is that Erin Galentine from Parks and Rec has done a really helpful job sort of organizing our playground and field process in the same way that they run Parks and Rec playground and field processes, which are very successful. So there's a series of 4 meetings that she's imagining. There'll be 2 school committee. It's a school committee process, but we're kind of following her process, but it's our field. So there'll be 2 school committee members, 2 Parks and Rec commissioners, and 3 members of the public. So sometime in the next 2 weeks, I think at the 11th, you guys have capital subcommittee on the 11th, to appoint. We have to appoint the committee. She's collecting all the applications for review at Capitol. And then there is one more thing I will say, which is that it's kind of funny, just as a footnote, to hear folks say, "Oh, well, clearly X is too detailed, and this is too much of a level of detail for Y committee." And I said, "Well, like what? Give me an example." And the example that someone mentioned this morning was dumpsters. You know, nobody cares about the loading and the dumpsters and the recycling. I'm like, oh, let me tell you. We've had extensive conversations about composting and loading and dumpsters. So whatever you think might be too small a detail is is not. So at any rate, I just thought I would pass that little tidbit along to you, since you are so interested in composting and food service and dumpsters.
Are the subcommittees of the building committee? I didn't get that.
Yeah, so the design working group is a subcommittee of the building committee. It's open to the public. It will be publicly noticed. It's an open meeting, and as will the playground committee. So the playground committee is actually it's sort of a school committee thing because it's our playground. So that's why I said it's sort of more of a dotted line. The recommendations are going to come both to the school committee and to the building advisory committee. But again, the school committee will ultimately vote on that. What's a little bit tricky is that they will probably finish their work a little bit ahead of where we will be on some of the costing and bidding decisions, so we won't quite know, as we just talked about with the high school, we won't quite know exactly where the budget is, so we're going to do our best to try to, size, bigger than a bread box, smaller than a kitchen sort of thing, as to what we're going for. We may not be picking exact playground equipment, but we'll see kind of how those play out. But that one is supposed to dovetail with the end of this process. Again, Philip will talk more about the timeline, but both of those are going to be completed as part of the design development phase.
But the park committee is not limited to members who are on the Driscoll Building Committee. So
Correct.
if additional people were wanting
Correct,
to
and
get involved.
usually there's at least one abutter. There's one building committee member. We'll see who we get, but we've had a good number of applicants already. So that's good.
All right.
Okay, anything else I can say by way of preface to that?
No, that was fantastic.
No, I actually didn't say anything.
I was going to say, feel free to skip ahead of
No,
any of the slides that
he's
she's already
doing,
covered.
he's got his whole, other 40 slides.
But
I
yes,
just tried to set a little bit of
just
context.
so you know, I do in fact have a picture of the Ridley dumpster that I took today on my phone.
Excellent.
because It is very, very important.
Excellent. You have no idea how important dumpsters are. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
so first I'll give you project overview and sort of tell you where we are. So as we all know, on November 19th, the Brookline Town Meeting formally voted that the town appropriate $115.3 million to reconstruct the Driscoll School, subject to the town vote. It's to include fossil fuel-free design and exclude the addition of any new central administration space, which had been a question. Then the warrant suggests the potential elimination of structured parking to accommodate the budget changes due to escalation since the previous town vote, which did not pass. So I'll be getting to that whole question of the structured parking towards the end of the presentation. Here is the aerial. So just to refresh people's minds, the school is the existing school outline is here. The kids will stay there during the construction process of the new school. And once the new school is finished, the kids will leave the old school, move to the new school, and then we will tear down the existing school, and that will allow us to have this area here for new play fields, playground, and that sort of thing, which is... I'm sorry, this is Washington Street here, Westbourne Terrace here. As part of this process, I'll get into a little bit more detail on the traffic and parking, but we're having a dedicated bus area here for dropping off and dedicated a new lane here for parent drop-off. And we're separating the deliveries as well, which come in from this alley on this side. So now that we're in the design development phase, the big difference between this and schematic design, we're really figuring what is the massing of the building, what are the rooms, what are they next to, and all of that sort of thing. Now that we're in design development, we're really treating each room as its own design project. So the gym, every wall, every surface, how do we want it to work inside every classroom, the difference between science classroom and a regular classroom. So that's very exciting, and to do that, we've been meeting with the teachers to talk about that level of detail. And we've gotten a lot of feedback, both recently and over the course of the last several months. So cafeteria layouts, we're going to have tables to allow 3 seatings of lunch to be provided. Central stairway, there was a concern that it was too large. We've reduced some of the open areas, the bathroom locations. We've moved the toilets to a more central location. The media center location, we have shown an alternate to provide it's on a different floor, which is more central to the classrooms, and the media center teacher is very enthusiastic about that. Makerspace fabrication lab location, we're showing alternate locations to be considered by the school building committee. Same with the music and multi-purpose space. There's a concern that there are too many entrances. We've heard from the Ridley School that there are issues with having decentralized entries, and so we are looking at that. We're providing an alternate entry situation to be considered. Guidance to be separate from main administration. We will show that. Other things from staff, the sinks should be inside of classrooms, not just in the bathrooms. They will be inside all the classrooms. A teacher lounge for community building, not a workroom. A 300 square foot staff lunchroom is included in the space summary. It will be fit out accordingly. The distance to central toilets for first and second grade is too far for younger students, and the teacher planning rooms at the first and second grades may be converted to toilet rooms to minimize those travel distances. So that actually seems like a little bit of a win-win. Open stairs, open to below areas at the central will be reduced, as I mentioned before. Other comments, the cafeteria acoustics. We will work closely with acoustical engineers to successfully address sound control. We will do that. Teacher planning rooms in K2 versus 3.8. The teacher planning room at K2 proposes toilet, as I just mentioned, so we can reduce those travel distances. And the K2 classrooms prefer direct access doors rather than operable partitions between the classrooms, because in K through 2, you're really doing project-based learning already in those classrooms, especially the K are larger, and so actually opening up to 2 different classrooms was not really seen as being something that they would like, whereas they do want a door, so they can very easily go from room to room, and so that actually saves money and helps pay for the bathrooms, and so we expect that we'll be heading in that direction.
Can I say something quickly? As a former teacher, you need the doors between the classrooms, because if the teacher has to leave the room when classes are in session, someone has to be able to watch those children. It's not just for the bathroom or for anything like that. It's a safety.
Absolutely, and we heard that loud and clear, which is why we're putting those doors in. And in terms of the community, we've heard comments as well. Safe access for pedestrians, bikes, and sidewalks, and we've been working with the town's transportation department, Safe Streets, and traffic consultant to provide safe access through all phases, and I'll get into more detail on that later. Environmentally designed, ecologically friendly, energy efficient. The building will comply with the town's fossil fuel-free guidelines, and will be LEED certifiable, but not LEED certified. This is not an MSBA project, so we're not required to give them the piece of paper, which is rather expensive, but the building will be designed to meet those standards. And play space during construction. We will be providing play space during construction. We started talking about that at the community meeting last night, and I know that is going to be something that we're going to want to devote a lot of time and attention to once we have the construction manager on board, hopefully in March, to really make sure that there's safe play area during the entire construction period.
Just quickly, Philip, I do want to just acknowledge, I mean, all that list there sort of understates all the work that you guys have been doing, and you said from the very beginning that as we got further into design development, we'd be returning to the staff, returning to the community, get further and further input, really address many of the open questions that folks had raised, and you know, absolutely, you have done that, you are doing that, and I want to thank you and your team for making the adjustments so quickly. We are showing pictures or slides tonight, but the committee will see more of that as we go along, but really some very quick work on some fundamental or just important concerns folks had, so thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for this presentation. It looks like you're making enormous progress very quickly. I do have one question. I'm a Driscoll parent as well as a school committee member, and I've heard from some teachers some concerns about whether or not there would be a space made available for breast milk pumping. That's a very it's an increasingly young staff, and quite a few of them
It's an important question. We've had that discussion with the staff and with the school principal, and there is a spare office that is in the program, and it is anticipated that that would be made available on an as needed basis. So there's a placeholder for a room for that has a window. It's a nice room. It isn't like a closet or something. Yes.
Maybe it doesn't matter.
For what it's worth, every window, inside and outside, will have blinds, and that's for security concerns. That is the world we live in now. So that is sort of at this point kind of non-negotiable in 2020 when you're designing a school. So yes, it will definitely have blinds. Oh.
In terms of the play space during construction, are there specific areas that have already been identified for where that could occur?
We have identified 2 potential locations, and they are. I didn't bring that slide with me.
The next presentation.
But at the next presentation, the quick answer is we've identified zones where we think we can do it, but we are a long way away from actually designing what they would be.
Thank you. And secondly, during the construction itself, how will noise and debris be mitigated in terms of the children who are continuing to learn at the present existing building?
This is something that comes up on every project like this, where you build the new building and then tear down the old building, which is actually a fairly common solution when a school needs to be rebuilt. The noise, there will be requirements written into the construction manager's contract to control this. There's noise, there's mud. You have to have wheel washers to keep the mud from going out onto the street. There will be a very detailed presentation on that, but so I don't think it would be appropriate for me to get into great detail, only to say that we will be getting into great detail, and it won't be a new problem that we have to solve. It has been solved. So now I'm going to start talking about parking decisions to date. Moving toward the discussion of underground parking. So we've had 2 meetings with the Transportation Board. On January 28th, 2019, we presented on-site parking alternatives for 0, 25, and 50 on-site spaces. The 25 and 50 were presented as underground, under the building options. The T-Board voted to allow 88 on-street parking permits for the Driscoll staff, which implies that you could have 25 spaces on site given the projected needs, and that the rest of the staff could park on the street. I'll show you the drawings that actually Ben presented at the time that showed where the staff would be parking for each of those 3 alternatives. Then on March 18th, after they had voted on the number of spaces that they would provide for the street permits on the street, they voted for the design to accept the recommendations of the traffic engineer on what to do with the adjacent streets and sidewalks to improve safety for the pedestrians, for the cyclists, and vehicles. So this is the slide that was presented a year ago, where option A had 0 staff on site, B had 25, and 50 C had 50 on-site parking spots. And each of those then related to the number of staff parking that would have to occur on town streets. So this is option A with 0 spaces on site, and the parking spaces were moving all the way down here from Griggs and up towards Quarry Road. Just to give you a sense, a half a mile radius is roughly here where it's past Quarry Road.
It looks as if there are parking spaces going up the hill on Lancaster and then across York, which is an exceedingly long walk back to Driscoll. But it's Lancaster that worries me as much as anything. That is a fairly steep hill, and it would be very difficult for some people to walk up there. But more importantly, in winter weather, when there's snow and ice on the ground, and people are carrying lots of things, because that's what happens when you teach. What's going to happen if somebody slips and falls down? Because that's where, I wouldn't want that to happen anyway, but that's where we have assigned their parking space. I think it's absolutely not okay to have parking on Lancaster. And York, to get to those York spaces, you've got to either go up Summit or you've got to go down. That's equally not feasible.
And so this is the option with 0 spaces on site.
But it's not all I'm saying to you is it is not a viable option.
Then option B is what would be allowed with 25 spaces on site. And basically, it's moving in a little bit. But pardon?
It's still on the hill.
Yes.
Can anybody explain why there were so few spaces allocated for Beacon outbound? There's often quite a lot of empty spaces.
Thank you for saying
We'll
that,
get there in a minute.
because I'm going to...
Can I just say one other thing? We're going to get there. But just, so option B is what if you guys recall, the school committee voted for 25 spaces on site. We didn't necessarily vote for 4 spaces here and six spaces there, but this is more or less this one was more or less what was approved at the Transportation Board in March. So just to rewind the clock. Okay.
And I'm not...
Just to remember. No, just we already proved this.
Further developments.
And
already proved
to be-
this.
They're going to be shown.
To follow up on your comment, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but
Just stay in order.
we've-
Can we stay in order?
Okay.
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there.
option C is what would happen if there were 50 spaces on site. Now here, this shows the basic layout around the building, showing the improvements that are proposed and that were approved in the March meeting with the T-Board. A separate bus lane here that pulls off of Washington so that the buses and the parents are completely separate when they drop off their kids. So this is widening Westbourne Terrace and creating a whole line of cars here, which incidentally also presumably could be used on the weekends to take traffic off from the people who are coming to use the park. There, we keep this running for the neighbors here. We're going to keep this open. This is indicating where we would have been ramping down to go underneath the building when with the underground parking. There's a bike lane that comes along here, and another one that comes along here. And the details are here. This is, you see the narrow bike lane here on Washington Street, for example. Pardon? There's parking here. It's just pulled off. Yes, we have to have that discussion about exactly what would happen where we're having the buses come in, and whether or not I think we would be removing these spaces here to have them be for the buses, but I don't want to say anything definitive about that because that's part of a larger discussion. That's sort of the next round of how.
Her question is, now there currently exists parking down much of that road. Is this saying that it would eliminate the parking down the road? Or is it just not, right?
There, Philip, is there still parking there?
That's her question.
Yes, there would be visitor parking here.
No, Philip, between the
From that
easement
visitor
and,
parking to the next road.
between the easement and Bartlett,
Oh,
There.
on the project north side, yes.
yeah, so that would still have parking on the other side of the bike lane.
Right where those cars are parked. Those two cars there, black cars are parked.
You see the cars parked there and
Parked.
there.
Those are parking
And there's
spots.
a bike lane next to them.
Oh, okay, so the bike lane's on the outside.
Yes.
Yeah, I think right now there's parking on both sides, and so that would
Yes,
be
you're right,
just the
Jennifer.
parking on one side.
No, there's still, I don't know.
I think according to this, there'll be parking on both sides.
So the black cars there are also parked? Is that right?
Bike lane, travel lane, and then a travel lane, and then another parking lane on the sidewalk. So it's parking on either side plus a bike lane.
So from this, I think there's a substantial investment that was requested by the transportation board on the sidewalk.
There was a request to turn this into a ADA accessible sidewalk, and that will require significant study. I'll put it that way. And
There's a sidewalk there now, correct?
no, it's there right now. Right now, these are garages that really are right against the sidewalk, and have ramps that come down, and the sidewalk is interspersed. In some cases, it's just dirt between them, and in some cases, there's sidewalk.
So I just want to flag that there's significant costs associated with turning that into a continuous ADA compliant sidewalk. So just
Right, but that should be something that the town would want to do.
another conversation.
And I don't think that should be part of the project, is what I'm trying to say. Happy to talk to them.
I just want to take a moment to kind of see where we are with time and how we're moving through with are we getting the right amount of questions and input, or for this presentation, do we need to move forward a little bit faster?
We're getting close
Okay.
here. I'm now going to show the new parking alternatives. This is really the crux of what I'd like you to consider. These were presented to the school building committee last week. So I'm going to show 3 different alternatives for parking. One with it under the building, which is this one. So in all cases, you'll see in red the vehicular roadway, and in this case, the vehicular roadway comes like this, goes across, and we had a ramp going down under the building. This is to say, option 1 is if we kept the parking underground. Because $4.4 million was eliminated from the budget as part of the town vote, if the structured parking is kept in the project, we'll have to find those $4.4 million of savings elsewhere in the project. So the pros are that the parking count is already approved by the Transportation Board and no additional impact on adjacent streets beyond what was already voted on. The cons are potential scope reduction items, lowering the quality of finishes, modifying the envelope, including more masonry, less glass. This might affect the visual impact from the neighborhood. And daylighting, the landscape quality of the outdoor space could be impacted. Program square footage would need to be reduced, and we don't know what that would mean. Potentially, the BEEP program might need to be reduced or deleted. Potential reduction of library, cafeteria, or fab lab. The geothermal wells might need to be reduced or deleted, and this would impact operating costs. The program change within the building would require additional design time if we're going to be changing the program, thus pushing out the schedule.
I'm sorry, I'm missing why you would need to eliminate BEEP or reduce the. Is there some? It looks like the
Because
red
if
is
we're-
not
if we're
touching the
going
blue.
to- The first option has an underground garage, which we have to pay for. The other 2 options don't have the underground garage, so we would not have. We would find the $4.4 million just by taking the underground garage out and relocating it to the surface.
So okay.
So here's option 2. Right now, it's basically taking the underground garage parking and putting it exactly where it is today. There is a parking lot right here that has that can hold 25 cars. It would be effectively free in terms of project costs. And so we could do that and then keep the 25 spaces. So the pros are that we already have the 25 spaces approved by the Transportation Board, no additional impact on adjacent streets, and would not impact the program or schedule. The cons are that there is some reduced open space between the property line here and the building. So here's what we had with the garage, and there is if we use the current parking lot. And option 3 is to sort of halfway between. If we only used half of the existing parking and then kept a sliver here, then we, rather than replacing 25 parking spaces, replace 12, and then the other spaces would have to be on the streets. So the pros are that it would not impact the program or schedule, assuming T-Board approval, and the cons are that it would require the Transportation Board approval, reduce some open space between the drive and the building, and would have additional impact on street parking. So those are the 3 alternatives: keeping it underground, using the existing parking lot, or using 2/3 of the existing parking lot. So to further the discussion, we have asked our transportation engineer, our traffic engineer, to study Beacon Street. So they have been doing that this week. And so I don't have the results yet, but I will be sharing them with the school building committee at our next meeting. They were out there on Tuesday and Wednesday from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. So they, yes, I'm sorry. So here between Wilson Road and Englewood, they studied both inbound and outbound, and also here basically from west, yes, to Westbourne Terrace. And they specifically did not look at the commercial area, recognizing that that would not be appropriate to be taking the public parking from the commercial area.
Could you go back to one of the pictures, or something about the way the little picture is shown? It's hard to get a sense of when the park there. So if that's option 3 or 2, okay, so that's 3, and then when you go back to option 2 as well, is there a way to see what that looks like when the new school is there? Because now when you're showing new school and old, I guess my question is that green space that's planned as play space, or that's green space that was like a buffer between the neighbors, or kind of where the parking garage entrance went?
I can't, because we're only starting the community process of the design, I can't say what it would what it would have ended up being, but under any circumstances it would be kind of long and narrow and broken up. Whether we could find something perfect for that kind of configuration, we would try, but it's not sort of a natural kind of, oh yes, we could just put a perfect playground in there kind of thing.
And what, am I correct in remembering that the entrance to the parking garage was some amount of that space?
Correct, yeah. So here you see it comes, you drive in and then you have to turn in, and that has to be 2 lanes wide. So it basically bisects the open space that would have been there anyway. And so we would have designed some way to cross over it, but it's, as you see, it's not a huge amount of space that we would have even with the underground garage. So now we're talking about the decision on this is the last slide. What we'd like to consider is whether it's possible to make a decision on underground parking. That if there is agreement to pursue underground parking, that would mean that the design team would work with the building committee to evaluate the scope and program square footage reductions to reach the $4.4 million in savings. The recommendation to be reviewed by the school committee at a future meeting. Once approved, then the design team would evaluate how much schedule we would need to, how much the schedule would need to expand in order to redesign those changes into the building. Or option B, surface street parking, where the design team and the traffic engineer would coordinate with the school staff, transportation board, and school building committee to create alternatives to be reviewed by the school committee at a future meeting, but there would be no impact on schedule, because really we can just go ahead with the building with the program we have and just move forward. So tonight you're not asking anybody to say this is where people should park, or on the streets, or this is not appropriate to have cars on this street versus that street. Or what we're really just asking is, can we agree whether or not the parking will be under the building, so then we can take it to the next level of discussion.
Under the building or not at all, or on surface somewhere.
So I think it seems to me, do you want to hear from people first?
So I think the idea was
this
to get.
is not really the question between the two of these. It's underground parking, yes or no? And if no, do we want to provide parking on site?
So that is
or
eventually the question. So just let me restate one thing that Philip said. The question for tonight is underground parking or some combination of surface and street. If we go with B, surface street, we still need to, some combination of surface and street, we still need to get the analysis from the traffic consultant about Beacon Street. We still need to look at maps. We would still need to have another conversation. It is not appropriate tonight, with the level of information we have, to make a determination about surface versus street. We don't have all of the analysis on that yet. So the question is, right.
Yeah, but I do think we could give some thought about
absolutely
whether it
give
should
some-
be on site or not.
We can absolutely give some thought. What we need, though, is a decision on underground parking, because that has $4.4 million of programmatic impact. It has timeline impact. It has schedule. It has cost. There's a lot.
It seems to me the two are interrelated.
They're not.
At least for me, they are.
So Helen, I hear you, but if we are going to wait for the surface street parking decision to make any of this decision, it's going to be another month or two, and that will push it out even
Excuse
further.
me, we can decide tonight. We need to hear from people, certainly. There's no doubt. I don't know how many people are here to talk about this, but we could decide tonight we want the 25 spots surface parking.
But
There's nothing that would preclude that.
I'm not prepared to do that because I don't know where the surface street, where the neighborhood.
Well, I know where the
streets would be.
neighborhood parking is presently.
But we don't know we don't know what the options are on Beacon. We haven't heard from teachers about walking distances. There's still more analysis to be done on surface versus street. So if someone's absolutely certain that come hell or high water they want surface parking, of course, that's fine. But there's more analysis that's coming on that decision. That's all I'm saying.
One other piece that I don't see in those drawings, there's no handicap parking.
There absolutely will be handicap parking.
So where would that be? Because you haven't shown it anywhere.
I will show
Okay.
Information that will, that's another example of the information that will be coming, whether you have it on site or whether you have it on street. So that's the reason we're trying to just take the one question here, which is most relevant, most pressing in terms of timeline, which is underground versus above ground. Just make that choice. The choice between on-site or street can come later when we give you more information.
The thing that I would say is, I drive down Beacon Street a lot, and there are lots of empty metered spots. Now, I'm not saying teachers would have to pay for the meters, I don't know. But if between Washington Street and Summit Avenue, on the inbound side, there's parking all along the median. Yeah, exactly. And it is important to me to know what is available there. I won't vote for all surface parking if people have to go up Lancaster Terrace. But if it's along there, that's fine. It's a flat walk. So I think that is information that is important for us to know. What really is available on the surface, which we don't know right now.
So one idea was to try to just get clarifying questions now, to hear from the public, and then do a deliberation once we'd heard from the public, but it's at the chair's discretion.
I think we should have public comment now. Okay. Do we have individuals who are wanting to speak on this?
I will say we've gotten one email from Mr. Ramft that was forwarded to the full committee expressing his thoughts, and he was there last night as well. There was there's been a lot of discussion at the building committee about it, which I'm happy to report, and it was discussed last night as well. But
Okay. We don't have anyone who signed up. Is anyone in the audience interested in speaking on this? No? All right. So then we can resume the discussion at the table. So is there need for further discussion, or do we have a motion that someone would like to make? Yes, Ms. Monopoly.
I would like to hear about the discussion at the building committee level, about what the building committee is thinking about this.
a lot of resistance to trying to find $4.4 million in the program to take out, and much more interest in some combination of on-site parking and looking at the map that we just talked about. So there was just a lot of resistance because $4.4 million is square footage, and that was a big concern to people. So there wasn't any support. We didn't take a vote or anything, but a fair number of people spoke, and there was not any support for the underground garage.
Okay. Yes.
I just want to say that I'm happy to have my mind changed by deliberation, but nothing has yet. I'm very comfortable with any combination of above ground and street parking and eliminating underground parking.
Is there a motion that someone would like to make? Yes. So the motion is to
move forward with some combination of surface and street parking, subject to some of the analysis we're going to get validating the numbers, but to not pursue an underground parking option.
Okay, and that's been seconded. I had a question about timeline. Is this going, so at the next transportation board meeting, which I understand is coming up, would they be making a decision about where and how many parking spaces would be provided in the neighborhood?
So there are three things that need to happen, and Jim can probably speak to these as well, but do you want to do it? Do you want me to do this? Okay, so there are three things that need to happen. By the way, I want a paycheck for this, I'm just saying. Number one, it's probably not ethical. Number one, we need to validate the numbers of staffing, and so Matt Gillis and the principal and some combination of Jim and Philip are going to validate the numbers, because we need to make sure that, number one, they were kind of like basic ideas, and we need to actually figure out, given the program, what the numbers are going to be, and we need to sort of discount them for TDM, and we have to discount them for how many teachers drive. So there's like a little bit of analysis.
TDM we don't have yet.
The TDM we do not have yet, and yes, exactly. So there's a set of analysis that is required just to validate the number of spots we need. Then the second, and that's happening. The second piece is the analysis that Philip mentioned about Beacon Street. So that is underway. And then the third piece is actually looking at maps, to Ms. Gatto's point and all the points we've been raising, and actually looking at the maps, because again, our guideline is a half a mile, whether or not Ms. Charlowski likes that, which apparently she doesn't anymore. It was a 10-minute walk.
Research that half a mile.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
I remember a quarter.
Go right ahead. I have the minutes. I'm happy to. Yeah, I pulled the minutes in the PowerPoint from last spring, because I had the exact same question, and Ms. Coyne, of course, at her fingertips, provided the information. At any rate, so then we have to kind of look at these maps. We probably are going to want some teacher input. There might be teachers who are perfectly happy to walk up the hill. Certainly, and there might be some who are absolutely opposed. And then we have to look at, just a little bit more information about what it would look like to do on street. So all of this is underway. My sense is that, I don't want to speak for you guys in terms of timeline, but my sense is that because all three of those are underway, the idea is to get that in front of at least us and the Transportation Board in February. Is that basically right? Yeah. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
No.
That's the timeline.
But I thought that I thought they were having a meeting before we're next talking about this. So are they, I guess.
No, I think when is the Transportation Board it's after February, or it's during February break, I think. I think we have at least 2 more school committee meetings, and we have our capital subcommittee meeting before. We just have to get that answer.
So The plan is to bring to capital subcommittee the plan of where teaching and parking would be, is that?
Well,
I'm
so
hearing?
my understanding is that Matt Gillis is working on that, and that's the idea, is to bring it sort of, and have this conversation in more depth at Capitol.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Roberts, and then Ms. Monopoly.
I just want to make a brief point in favor of any of the configurations of above ground surface level parking, which is that having that kind of proximate parking access to that green space makes that space much more accessible to community members who would have handicapped accessibility issues. And then they would, during recreation time, weekends, evenings, would have better and safer access to that green space than if they had to walk through neighborhoods. And that's an important consideration for me.
I guess I'm sort of asking for clarification, but I'm not under the impression that we choose where we want these spots. The Transportation Department makes recommendations to the Transportation Board. I just think we need to sort of, I mean, we may be able to make suggestions, but because it's based on there's like go ahead.
Yeah, so what happens is Matt, Gillis, and Todd work closely together to identify which streets, and then, and then we place them, and we work together on it, yeah.
But there is a process, there's a set of numbers of available spots, and
Yeah.
what's already got.
Yeah,
needs to
it's
have
40% of available,
So
yeah.
it's not possible. But all we can decide is how many spots we put on our site. So in a sense, we might actually want to delay that till after we see where transportation is. So it's a little back and forth, but the goal is February.
And Mr. Perlman had a comment, and then maybe we could have a vote.
To the point that Ms. Ditkoff just made, I am not comfortable endorsing a plan ultimately that would potentially take up a significant amount of the play space. So before making a decision on what the details of the final plan would look like, I would want to make sure that we have these studies completed first. As to the preliminary question of do we want to forego structured parking, that I'm totally comfortable with doing, but I don't want that vote to be misconstrued as an approval for whatever the Transportation Board might recommend. I would like to assume that they'll propose a plan that will be reasonable, but just in case it's not, I don't want us to be cornered into, for example, taking away one of the play spaces, because I think it's very important that we maintain those two different play spaces.
Well, although I want to clarify, if we went to the Transportation Board, if we vote no underground parking, and we go to the Transportation Board and say, we want 25 spaces in the neighborhood, and they say, no, thank you, we have eliminated play space. Because we've then decided, right, our options are underground parking or a combination of on-street and play space.
But look at that, look at what the space, I think it's important, just to Mr. Perlman's point, to actually look at the space that we are talking about. We are not talking about eliminating like the pre-KK jungle gym. It is this pretty narrow strip that JLA is proposing. We're not talking about anyway, I think this is where we are talking about on the site. Is that fair? It's now parking, right, it's now parking lot. And the roadway has to be there for the easement anyway.
This has to be here whether it's here or here, but this has to be here, and there needs to be something here to get down to the this is where we were during that design. So it still leaves all of this, which is basically outside of the school. This is the natural place for the playgrounds, because being close to the cafeteria, subject to study, but that's the thought right now, and there's room here for a fun playroom. So if there were a place to do it, it actually happens that there's already parking up there.
So, just a point of clarification, to have the parking lot there versus not having the parking lot there, how much difference, how many feet difference is it?
I believe it's about 7,000 square feet.
No, the width. The width of the road now is,
The width of the road, so we would have, the difference, it would be 24 feet wide versus 60 feet wide. So,
You're
sorry.
parking on both
The road
sides?
itself would stay, the road itself would stay 24 feet wide to allow.
24 feet wide?
Yeah, 24 feet wide.
Okay.
And then you would have 18 feet on either side for parking for handicap.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, so the discussion and decision about street, on-site, where it would go, we will be having at one of our next two meetings, and so we will have more opportunity to have conversation about that. For tonight, the only decision is whether we would like to forego underground parking for a combination of, in some way, on-street, on-site parking. Does anyone have any other specific questions or comments on that? Yes.
So I just wanted, the wording of the motion, does it, the way that we worded it, does it mean that we have to have a combination? Or could we choose one or the other? So some combination means solely, okay, that, I just want to clarify.
Right, so it could be on-site, on-street, or a combination of
thereof, is
I
that
can
clarify?
let me retract the motion. It might be simpler to just say, we are not going to pursue underground parking. How's that?
Okay.
Is that okay?
All right, so all of those in favor? Okay. And that's unanimous. So our next, is that everything that you needed, Ms. Wolf, to call for tonight? All right, so next we're going to move to, thank you, Phil.
Mr. Gay. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you for all the work that went into this, and we look forward to more. Thank you, Mr. Gillis.
And thank you for the early grade bathrooms.
So it would be great, so we do have capital on the 11th, so it would be great, just on a scheduling standpoint, if this could go to capital before it comes back to full committee. Okay, excellent. So do we have any further update from finance, Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
I have no idea what it is. I think next week we are going to have a discussion with BFAC about their report. If anybody who is coming to that can please read the report. It's very long. Please read it and then come with your questions. I'm not exactly sure how much time it's going to take, but that is probably worth looking at. Other than that, I don't think.
Susan, I think Sharon has a question.
I add one point. The advisory liaison to the finance subcommittee, who, or to the school committee, who is also on the BFAC committee, specifically requested the presence of as many school members as possible, school committee members as possible at the BFAC presentation on Tuesday evening.
Just if
Tuesday, the 4th.
It's select board. I'm sorry.
Not our finance subcommittee meeting, but specifically at the public BFAC presentation of its final report.
And one thing that we did mention to him is that we have moved finance so that it's 4:00 right before school committee on next Thursday. And so to the extent that people cannot make it to select board, maybe they can watch it, or we can try to get a better crowd at school committee at 4:00 because it's a lot of nights out. So we did mention that to him.
Charlevsky?
Just so you're aware, the superintendent search committee is meeting that night, so 4 of us won't be there.
Okay, capital, any update? Not about BEEP? Not about anything that we've discussed at a full committee meeting?
I wouldn't think of it.
Okay, excellent.
But we did get a letter from the MSBA about the Pierce School. So we have been going back and forth with the enrollment reports, and we got them all the information they needed. They unfortunately did not get back to us in time so that we could make the February meeting, which I think was their plan all along. I hate to say it, but that was my sense. So it looks, we will be at the April meeting of the MSBA to come to an agreement, hopefully, that will have gotten the paperwork back from them about the enrollment report and be able to move forward.
Okay. And next, we did discuss earlier, next meeting, we will be having the consultants on the enrollment report will be coming to full committee as well, so timely there. An update from curriculum, Ms. Scotto?
Our next meeting is February 4th, and we did have BAS on the agenda. It is not on the agenda. We will put it on at a later point in time during the year. What we will be doing is looking at the course catalog for the high school because we have to approve all of the courses that are added to the course catalog. So that will happen at the next meeting. Matt Rosenthal, who is the ECS director, will be coming to talk about his visit to a school whose name I have forgotten.
High Point
High Tech High. He will come and talk to us about that and some of the things that are going on there. And we will hear a report about what is being done about climate change already at this point in time in the school, because there are a couple of places where it is, and I know Ms. Monopoly wanted to talk about climate change. So we will be having some of that. I also want to just do this is February 4th, it's next week. I want to just mention a couple of things. The BEF had its Green Apple event, I think it was last night. It's an event to thank donors who have made significant contributions, and Anthony Meyer spoke, as did Alyssa Henry, a Baker school teacher, and it was wonderful to hear about, first of all, what the BEF grants had helped Alyssa do, and also to hear Anthony talk about what the climate is like at the high school and what is happening, etc. March, as I said, March 27th is their Trivia Bee. So if you want to have a trivia team, as we often do, you can sign up for that. And also they have people running in the marathon. So it's a good thing. These people are looking for support. So that would be a good thing. I also have to mention, because I'm the Medco liaison, I am getting now something called Millie's Monday Medco message, and I just wanted to make sure that you all were getting it as well, because I think it really gives you a look into the broader program of Medco. This is not just, she's a Pierce parent and she heads Medco, and this gives us a look beyond Brookline Medco program, which is also doing some pretty good things, and I will report about them at another point in time. But make sure you read Millie's Monday Medco message.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Scotto, I just wanted, when you mentioned the High Tech High, is that what the ECS presentation is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Fetterspiel.
So I think, Barbara, I'm not sure we got the report on the last curriculum meeting that you had.
I went back and forth in my mind.
Yeah, I don't think
about scheduling, because
No.
there was a school committee meeting after that, and I couldn't remember.
I think you were absent. No?
I was I was absent last week.
Well, I might have missed it.
It was the first week of January where we met. I can give it to you again. It doesn't
Well,
matter.
if we've had it, you don't have to give it to us again. Did we have? But I don't think we.
I thought we had it, but no.
We didn't talk about scheduling.
Well, we
talked about it at the curriculum
We also talked about the middle school.
I think there's desire to hear the update
again.
from January.
Right.
Okay.
I can give you the update from January. The first thing we did was talk about middle school and what kinds of things we had to do to make changes in our middle school. And Monica, of course, my brain, I haven't
Monica Crowley from Lawrence.
Monica Crowley talked about what she had done at Devotion Middle School, and talked about all of the planning that went into it, and the advisory program that was set up, etc. And then Torrance, the new Baker principal, was there, and he came from Belmont, and he had lots of things to say, and both of them talked about the fact that young adolescents do better in situations where, first of all, they're attached to at least one adult and maybe more, but that sometimes working in teams where advisory was a central part of it was really important, so that you wouldn't necessarily have, depending on the size of the school, you wouldn't necessarily have all of your kids in one cluster, but there would be some in one cluster and some in the other, and they would really work with their group. They need a lot of support because it's such a difficult time in their life. And having something that is not an imitation of high school is very important because they're really not ready for that many kids. In fact, very few. They may be academically ready, but they are not emotionally ready. So we talked about that, and also Torrance said you need to think about what ninth grade looks like, and so it was I thought a very useful very useful meeting. So that was the first thing we talked about, and then we talked about scheduling, and scheduling is indeed a problem, and it is a problem for what things that I mentioned earlier, because you have people teaching in 3 or 4 different schools in town. They have to get there. That's very difficult for them. You also have, some schools have technology classes. Other schools have eliminated that entirely. And what they are aiming for, and it's also conservatory was a problem because you needed more teachers, and often they were not available because they were shared with other schools. So it sets up a very difficult problem for the people doing the schedules. And the other thing that was worrisome was the fact that when kids get to high school, they can often identify what schools the kids came from because of their preparation in certain subjects. Because some schools have a little bit more time in math than they have in language arts, and so what we're trying to do, and I think Nicole has been working on this. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can make sure that when kids go to, and these names mean nothing, but one goes to Devotion, somebody goes to Driscoll, somebody comes to Runkle, that when they get to the high school, they will have the same experiences. So that is one of the goals, and the scheduling is very difficult because the schools are big. You have to take into consideration all kinds of things. For example, if you're at the Coolidge Corner School, getting from place to place takes a lot more time. If you're at Pierce School, the same thing is true. So those are fewer minutes in the day. If you recall earlier this year, I think it was this year, people wanted more time for recess. Other people say we're not getting enough math. Other people say science and social studies needs to be increased. And as I said to somebody recently, time is not elastic. You have to fit what you have to fit into the schedule. And you have to be able to make it work with the staff and the building and the students you have. So it is not as simple a problem as some people would like to make it out. And I'm sure we will talk some more about it, but I think that was the gist of it. And I don't know if anybody else on the committee remembers anything. Jennifer?
I just actually wanted to highlight one of the things that Barbara said about some of our staff and specialists being split between schools. And I think many of us are already aware of this, but just to bring it back up, that the impact that causes on scheduling is really problematic because it creates times when there's not flexibility to make space for larger blocks of time because staff are only available on that day. And so there are some budgetary implications I'd really like for us to have more conversation about how we can reduce the number of staff between buildings. And it's also difficult, I think, for staff to make connections and have a sense of community at schools when they're jumping all around. But primary focus being on students, just the difficulty it is to get our students the number of minutes that we want them to have. I think there are some budgetary implications with the number of staff. And before I forget, we talked about I was at a meeting recently. I'm just saying this now because I'm not going to remember later. There was some difficulty getting to outdoor program space at Coolidge Corner School because there's no direct door access. So so when we figure out that parks and outdoor space and the outdoor space, we should put a door in the Driscoll building so they can go. Talking about the distance of traveling to get from class to class inside of CCS to the other side. There was a comment that there was no direct door to that space, so you have to go all the way around and it's time. So just how I'm thinking of it. But
Okay. Yes.
So again, thank you, Barbara. I'd like to just highlight something that you mentioned that has come up, and that is that it is true that some schools have a very different schedule from other schools, and that if we look in particular at science and social studies in our K-5 programs, we'll see that some schools have twice as many minutes per week as other schools do, and that in fact our science and social study minutes have been cut dramatically in the last 5 years. And so I would urgently request that we have that presentation brought to the whole school committee so we can have a conversation about it. Because I am concerned. I think that that's not the intent, at least of many of us on the school committee, to in fact reduce science and social studies, but rather to increase those minutes. And so I really request that that comes to us ASAP.
I was present at the curriculum subcommittee meeting. I am not a member of the curriculum subcommittee, and so I'd like to build on what Ms. Federspiel has said. I believe that there are 3 curriculum-related issues that need to come forward to the full committee for presentation and deliberation with some meaningful time. One of those is the question of science and social studies. The second is the question of how we are managing scheduling across the district, period. And the third is the question of how we are managing literacy in our K-5 programs, and that includes attention to both our Fontes and Pinnell curriculum and the Foundations curriculum, and the time that's being allocated to it, and how it is that we're making priorities and decisions. I can say that while I am not a member of the curriculum subcommittee, I regularly attend listening sessions with teachers, and I do believe that I and any other school committee member who does attend those listening sessions has new information to share with the entirety of the committee as we start to think forward into our goal setting process for this next coming academic year.
Yes, Ms. Monopoly, and then we're going to government relations.
No, I would just like to also support the idea of bringing the conversation about several of these issues, in particular the science and social studies and the number of minutes that we have to full school committee. Being that I think even if we have some conversation at curriculum, which is a meaningful place, I think a lot of people are going to want to have access to that information, and we may be just repeating some of that presentation. So I would encourage that. I am concerned about the number of minutes. And I would put forth that this may not even just be, to me, it's not a Brookline scheduling issue. It's a larger national issue about where we focus our time. And if our schedules are a statement of our values, our core values, and what's important, then we need to make sure that our schedules reflect what is truly important to us. So I think it is time to take a look at that and make sure that we can do that. And there may be budgetary implications to making sure that we can make that happen. And I think that needs to be a priority.
Just to add to that, I would say I really urge the committee to consider what Ms. Scotto said, and I think also Ms. Monopoly in terms of the broader view. The concern about social studies and science is actually simplifying it quite a bit. It's really a bigger conversation, which I think you just spoke, Ms. Monopoly, about how do we, with all the things we want to do in our schools, and whether it's recess, as you mentioned, or social studies and science, or world language, or arts and music and PE and health, wellness and maker spaces and technology. And really, it's a challenge, as you said, across the country about how do we fit all of that in a non-elastic school day or school year. And so it's really well worth the school committee digging into and understanding the choice to be made, bit by bit over the years. And that's, from all different sources and all different sort of factors, I'd say, choices. And but it really is a struggle that our teachers and our principals, our specialists have every day, and they're making difficult choices. And we all are. And so I think I thank you for bringing it up, and it definitely needs to have a much better understanding across the board on it.
I'm going to I'm just going to have one little pushback on Ms. Monopoly's point. And I know, and I say this often, I'm not even sure where on capital, of pushing the discussion on Driscoll and parking, that it goes to capital first, and hopefully some of the issues can be worked through, questions can be asked so that we have informed presentation, additional information that we find that the committee is interested in, that can be kind of vetted through that committee. And this is something that
that we have talked about at length as a goal for this year. And so something we've done for capital, something that finance has done, is that sometimes there's a need for additional meetings. And so perhaps the curriculum subcommittee can discuss about whether there is a need for an additional meeting so that that conversation can have. But I am going to continue to push back that work needs to be done at subcommittee levels before conversations are ready for full committee. And so I just want to put that plug in and to urge the committee to get together to find another time perhaps where those conversations can be had fully so it's ready for full committee discussion. Yes, Ms. Perlman.
Well, I certainly hear what you're saying, Ms. Schreiner-Oldham. I'm a little concerned on these particular issues because at the finance subcommittee we're actually having some presentations that include a lot of material that would be relevant for the curriculum subcommittee. So I do like your idea of considering additional meetings, but I'm not sure that curriculum would be the only place to do it in, because if we're doing it in finance as well, maybe there could be a joint finance and curriculum meeting, because when we're assessing the financial implications of some of these programmatic decisions, we also need to consider the curricular merits of them. And I'm not sure how to always separate those two. And I do overhear some other members saying that's basically the full committee, but that's why.
It is, though, but it's about, work that kind of in that collaboration of work between staff and committee members that happens at a different way at a subcommittee meeting than it does at full committee. And so, all of these are incredibly important conversations. All of these conversations should be happening right now, going on, lots of work happening on them. I'm just pushing back on all of our committee chairs and those members on the committee to find time to have these important conversations so the work can be done at subcommittee levels so then it can come ready at full committee. So, all right, is this on government relations? Okay, we're going to move to government relations. We have new business as well.
So I'm going to be good and put government relations together with EDCO.
Excellent.
If that's okay.
Absolutely.
Everybody will. So I went to the EDCO board meeting today, and just a quick update. There's some financial difficulties there. I think I mentioned it the last time. They've managed to half the financial difficulties and in terms of the deficit for this year. And they're working on, they've reduced staff and they're working on increasing revenue by getting more kids. And it's a number of kids will change the whole picture there. But I wanted people here to at least be aware of that. The other piece, at the EDCO board meeting, Tom Scott, the executive director of the MASS, was there. And he talked to us about the Chapter 70 funding and discussions that they've had with the state and with the Commissioner Riley. Apparently, in some respects, and from what I understand, we got $253,000 or $34,000 from the state in Chapter 70, extra Chapter 70, somewhere between $234,000 and $250,000. I get that. I get that. No, that isn't my point. The point is, it's probably good that we got less, because anybody who got less than $1.5 million increase has to fill out the short form, the state accountability. There are 24 pages of instruction, apparently, on this short form, and then you fill out the form. The focus of the money is on underserved groups in schools, academic and social and emotional support, and the short form is due by April 1st. Even though we don't have the money yet, this is, the way the government works. It was interesting, of all the EDCO communities, only 2 got more than $1.5 million. One was Arlington, which got $2 million, and Waltham got more, but I can't remember the exact number. They got quite a bit more. And most of them got between 30 and 50,000. So, but they're smaller districts. But it was interesting. The issues about how then do you fill out this form. this money that we're only going to get half of, but we're supposed to justify using all of it for I don't think there's a problem. I think we have enough monies that we already spend on underserved communities within our population, but it's interesting. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that it's basically 35% of all the communities in Massachusetts are getting the majority of the money, the new money. Most of them are urban, low income, and with the large gateway cities, definitely, and have large English language learner populations. That was the basic points that he made.
All right. On that, we're going to go to Mr. Glover with policy.
Policy meeting, or policy subcommittee, will be meeting on February 10th. The agenda will be developed probably early next week, or finalized early next week.
Okay. And then superintendent search process?
Yep. That's ongoing. So we met earlier this week, the superintendent search committee with the superintendent search public advisory committee. We met on Tuesday, I think. And it was sort of a workshop to prepare us for the review of the applicants. To date, I believe we have 22 applicants that we'll be reviewing. That review is underway sort of independently by all of the members, and we will be meeting next Tuesday, to discuss, and hopefully from there make determinations as to whether we want to invite any of those candidates in for interviews, or how many we want to invite in for interviews. And then those interviews will begin hopefully shortly thereafter. After that round of, I may have said this before, but after that round of interviews, hopefully there'll be a group of finalists selected that would interview with the school committee as well as with the whole district. So stay tuned. The process is exciting, and we're looking forward to really getting into the meat of it next week. I will note for any members of the public, the vast majority of next week's meeting will be an executive session, due to the need to maintain privacy of the applicants, as well as to not jeopardize or undermine the whole process. So there won't be a lot of substantive action in the open session of that.
I'm sorry if you said this, did you say how many applicants we've received so far?
22.
22? And then I did also want to mention that Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff has stepped off of the superintendent search committee, and that I've asked Ms. Charlepsky to take her place on the committee. And I appreciate all of the time and meetings that you have attended, and the work that has happened up until that point to develop the superintendent search committee, public advisory, whatever you're helping.
The SPAC.
The SPAC. Oh, SPAC. Okay, the SPAC. Thank you in all of the work that you've done to this point. And I do appreciate all of the time and energy that everyone is putting into all of these assignments. And thank you to Ms. Charlepsky for agreeing to take on another assignment. I know this one has a lot of meetings, especially as we gear up into February. So, as Mr. Glover said, more to come on superintendent search process. Are there any questions before we go on to any other additional liaisons or updates?
I would just mention one thing. Superintendent search activities could possibly bump the next policy subcommittee meeting. So just keep an eye on the calendar. We will try not to bump it for the entire month. We will sort of try to find a date in February.
Is there a way perhaps
if that has to happen?
Is there a way perhaps the meeting could take place? I know that there are some restrictions during the day meetings, but since so many of the negotiations and superintendent search committee meetings are happening in the evening, could policy perhaps revisit morning meetings?
Ms. Monopoly can't do morning meetings, so that's challenging.
Although you would get to a quorum. I guess to the extent, I wonder if having not a quorum of the meeting is better than 4 months of no meetings.
We would still have a quorum, we just wouldn't have a chair. Would it be possible to deputize one of the senior members of the committee as a temporary chair for the purpose of holding the meeting?
Maybe
We can think about that. I don't know if that's, we'll see. I mean, another way to think about it is we just move the meeting 2 weeks, and I think we probably should talk about figuring out how to add additional meetings in the months of March and April to sort of make up for some of the meetings that we missed. And that may be, in actuality, may be a good thing in terms of allowing us to get a lot of momentum on very specific topics instead of meeting once a month. So.
And maybe if you're able to develop whatever the agendas are going forward, it might give staff appropriate time to prepare for multiple meetings or something too. So,
Yeah,
but just if you guys can put heads together to figure out the scheduling on
Sure.
making those happen, especially if you're going to bump another.
Not
All
a
right.
guarantee, it's just, it's a possibility. Yeah.
Additional liaisons. Yes, Ms. Miller?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I believe, if I have the date correct, that next Wednesday, February 5th, is Walk, Bike, and Roll to School Day, or Car Free School Day. So we encourage everyone, I would encourage everyone to walk and bike every day, but especially making an effort on this day, and that at all our schools.
Now we have new business. Anyone have any items of new business? All right, seeing none, we have, are we confirmed that we do have something? Okay, so a motion to meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purpose. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Unit A, Unit B, and paraprofessionals, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. And we will be returning into open session after the meeting.
Yes. We're way ahead of you. Anybody? I thought we were doing roll call.
We are. Ms. Dickoff, are we? Yes.
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 Nothing's quick in the other room.
it done, but if we, whatever. If it takes 3 months, it doesn't matter. That one mattered.
That's why I think the three of it, I need to make it to No, but I think.
All right, guys, we are back in session.
Everybody to go. But I think that for the purpose of the finance subcommittee, it was to identify specific issues that were going to be relevant to the schools to reference.
Okay, I think we are back in session now. Is that correct? So we have an MOU, which I think, or an MOA, excuse me, that everyone has seen that we need to discuss and vote on. It's a memorandum of agreement between the school committee and the Brookline Educators Union paraprofessional unit. It is for a 1-year wages-only contract, a wage increase of $1.25 per hour in each of the salary schedules. It's been approved by each of the negotiating teams. It was ratified by the Brookline Educators Union paraprofessional unit on this past Monday, and it's being submitted now for ratification by this body. I think this is a really great step in terms of showing our commitment to our paraprofessionals and our appreciation for all of the great work that they do in our classrooms and in our schools. I think we evidenced this that commitment and that appreciation in our last contract with the substantial wages we were able to wage increases we were able to give then, and this is just sort of a continuation of that. And I think this really is substantial and really is significant and will really make a difference in the lives of a lot of folks. So I am happy to move it for approval, and I seek a second.
We have a second. All right.
Any further discussion or?
All right. All those in favor? Enthusiastic, unanimous committee. All right. With that, we will adjourn.